please look into the camera and give that family your this one right here.
Thank you.
And give that family your 30-second elevator pitch. Go.
I understand why you were concerned about New York City. You were concerned about your family's safety. As mayor, I will deliver public safety that you expect and deserve. I was just endorsed by the Police Captains Union because they know that we need a mayor who's going to prioritize real change on the ground to get boots on the ground where they can keep us safe. And also, Florida's weather is turning pretty nasty now. I know it was nice a few months ago.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. Ms. Morales, same question to you. Please look into the camera and convince that family why they should come back to the city. Your time starts now.
Primeramente, le quiero desear buenas tardes a todos los latinos de Nueva York. Estoy muy orgullosa de ser la primera latina que se ha postulado para la alcaldía de la ciudad. In terms of returning from this crisis, one of the things we have to recognize is that this is also an opportunity for us to confront and face the deeply rooted systemic and structural issues and inequities that have plagued our city for so long, that made it possible to increase the divide in our communities. And this is an opportunity for us to put a stake in the ground and create a new New York City that works for all of us.
Thank you. Sally?
Thank you, Ms. Morales. The next question will go to Mr. McGuire and Ms. Wiley. Ms. Wiley, we'll begin with you. Here's a scenario. A biotech company is considering moving to Queens, bringing 1,000 jobs and economic activity. But with crime and taxes going up, the CEO is a little bit hesitant and demanding tax breaks. We'd like you to give that CEO your 30-second elevator pitch, and please be specific about what you will offer them. Go.
Well, thank you for considering New York. And this is a city that's a great city because we have one of the best workforces in the world, which is why we are one of the largest tech sectors, even adding jobs during COVID. And this is a place where you're going to get the talent because we're going to invest in great public schools and schools that serve all our kids, including hiring 2,500 more teachers to bring class sizes down. I know that you don't need our subsidies or resources to thrive. What we do need is a city that is growing for every last New Yorker.
Thank you, Ms. Wiley. Mr. McGuire, similar scenario for you, except that biotech company with 1,000 jobs wants to leave the city because of crime and taxes. What would you offer to keep them? You have 30 seconds to make your pitch.
Hello, I'm Ray McGuire. I understand what it's like to have the anxiety about crime in this city. I have a long-standing track record in the world of business, helping businesses to grow, making certain I got the best talent. We need you. We need you to realize, to make sure that New York's best days are ahead of it. If I look at all the other people who've talked about what they've done, they have failed. I have a track record of delivering, and I will deliver for you. New York is your home, and New Yorkers, I'm going to help make sure that I'm your partner in leading this city forward.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire.
Thank you. Thank you. Buenas noches a todos. Our next elevator pitch is for Mr. Donovan and Mr. Adams. Mr. Adams, next week, a city board will decide if nearly 1 million apartments will get a rent freeze. You have advocated against a rent freeze, siding with landlords. What's your 30-second pitch to the tenant who cannot afford an increase? Tell that tenant, how will you help them? Time starts now.
We need a rent freeze for the over 1 million tenants in the city, and I did not cite with the landlords. In fact, what I stated was that we need to look at the small property owners. Those small property owners, 1 to 4 family homes. If you do a rent freeze without ensuring that we don't have a mortgage freeze or compensate them, you're going to have those small property owners lose their home. That is going to be the greatest loss of wealth for Black and brown people in this city. We can't allow that to happen. Let's have a rent freeze for the larger units, but we should not have it for those smaller units.
Thank you. Mr. Donovan, a reverse scenario for you. What do you say to the small landlord who says, with a rent freeze, I cannot afford to maintain their property and pay my bills? How will you help them? You have 30 seconds.
We're on the verge of the worst eviction crisis our city's ever seen. And we need a mayor at this moment who understands how to make housing more affordable in this city and will fight for both our tenants and our small property owners. Just like I did after the Great Recession, I helped millions of families stay in their homes. But I also know something else, how to make sure that we bring down homelessness in our city. We're seeing a pandemic, a doubling of the number of individuals on our streets and in shelter these last 8 years. I brought down homelessness by 30% when I was housing commissioner and housing secretary.
Thank you,
I
Mr.
can do
Donovan.
that again as mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. For Mr. Stringer and Ms. Garcia, we'll apply the elevator pitch to the challenges of police recruiting. Mr. Stringer, police departments across this country are struggling to recruit officers amid a national reckoning on race and law enforcement. What is your 30-second elevator pitch to convince a young person in the city that they should join the NYPD? Remember, you're speaking directly to a potential young recruit. You have 30 seconds.
What I would say to all our potential recruits is the following. When you come to a new, revised, and reformed police department, you're going to want to serve this great city. First of all, we're going to make sure that we recruit from New York City, and we're going to expand the pool of applicants so that people of color view policing as something that's worthy and honorable. That hasn't been the case, and we have seen over-policing in so many communities of color. It's now time to create a reform mechanism in the police department where people will step up and want to serve. I believe there's a future for all of the recruits, but we have to also change the paradigm of policing in this city.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. Ms. Garcia, your turn. Same pitch to that potential recruit. You have 30 seconds.
You have an opportunity to come work for the greatest city in the world, to be part of fundamental change and show that we can have a police department that is keeping all of us safe and respecting everyone, regardless of the color of their skin. And this is personally important to me. My brother is African American, and I know the challenges that he's faced. When you are a new recruit, you will be able to walk down the street and engage with community and be part of something great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Candidates, we're going to talk about public safety now, top of mind for New Yorkers, especially the alarming jump in violent crime. You've all made it a top priority, but with some very different strategies. So we've got questions for each of you. You'll have 1 minute to answer. We'll begin with you, Ms. Wiley. You've called for fewer police officers and transferring money away from the NYPD and into programs that address what you've called the root causes of crime, including poverty and mental health. That's a long-term plan. How will you make the city safer immediately?
Look, I have been Black all my life, and I know what it's like to fear crime and police violence. And I'm also someone who has worked in academia as a professor of public and urban policy. I look at the facts. And what we have the opportunity to do right now is be smart about growing public safety, which starts day one in a Maya Wiley administration. Because here's the reality. We are hiring police officers to do the job of social workers. We are hiring police officers to do the job of psychologists. And what the community that has been suffering from the greatest gun violence, like Brownsville, has demonstrated, that when we invest in trauma-informed care, when we stop the gun from getting fired in the first place, we are safe from both crime and from police violence, and that's the way we will grow safety.
Mr. Adams, you've been a critic of the NYPD, but you're also proposing to return to some aggressive policing tactics, including the limited use of stop and frisk and returning plainclothes officers to neighborhoods where crime is rising. How will you ensure as mayor that these strategies won't harm Black and brown New Yorkers as they have in the past?
Let's be clear. I don't want to return to anything. I want to show how to use tools correctly, and at least that's very important. And I believe the question that you ask is significant because fighting crime is both intervention and prevention. Prevention, those are the long-term plans that I talk about. Something simple as dyslexia screening. 30% of our inmates in Rikers Island are dyslexic. Let's prevent, but we need intervention. And what does intervention look like? A plainclothes unit that focus on guns. The overproliferation of guns in our city is destroying us. We just had a shootout today where young people had to dive and duck. We can't wait until we have 3-year-olds shot in Times Square. If we don't get gun violence under control, it's going to stop our economic recovery. And I believe we can do so by preventing the flow of guns in our city and do real preventive steps that I am talking about. It's the combination of the two that we need.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Adams. Mr. Yang, you've also advocated for tougher policing. You've also said that you're an outsider with a fresh perspective. Why would New Yorkers be safer with you at the helm of the NYPD than with Eric Adams, who has decades of experience as a cop?
Well, the people you should ask about this are Eric's former colleagues in the Police Captains Union, people who worked with him for years, people who know him best. They just endorsed me to be the next mayor of New York City. They think I'm a better choice than Eric to keep us and our families safe. And the reason for this is that they want someone honest as a partner who will actually follow through. And one of the captains said something to me about why they chose not to endorse Eric. They said that Eric last summer advised New Yorkers to take matters into their own hands and confront their neighbors over illegal fireworks. One woman, Shatavia Walls, took Eric's advice and was killed. And a captain said to me while we were talking about working together, said that this was the most irresponsible thing he'd seen from a public official, and it's not the kind of leadership that he wanted to see in the next mayor. I was also endorsed by the Firefighters Union last week, another group of New Yorkers who literally rush into burning buildings to save our lives and property. I will do everything necessary to keep us and our families safe.
Mr. Yang, thank you. Mr. Adams, would you like to respond briefly?
Yes, he first should follow the rules. Stop means stop. Those captains that he's talking about, they didn't endorse him because they thought he could do a job. They didn't endorse me because I didn't ask for their endorsement, never went in front of them.
NBC reported otherwise. NBC reported you asked for their endorsement, Eric.
Never went in front of them. I said months ago, I'm not taking any of the union's endorsement.
You met with the lieutenants and you called the captains, Eric.
I said I was not going to.
Is that true?
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Yes, it is, Eric.
No, it's not.
You can ask the head of the captains union, Eric. He'll say, yes, you did call.
You know, New Yorkers didn't tune in tonight to hear us fight with each other. They want to know how we're going to fight for them. This is a moment where we have more than 500,000 New Yorkers still out of work. It's not time for the old political fights. This is a moment where we have to fight for New Yorkers and bring new leadership and change.
May I finish my 30 seconds before I was cut?
Mr. Adams, we gave you a chance to address that, but briefly, why didn't the captains endorse you? You were former captain.
And that's what I was attempting to do.
All right, you have about 10 seconds.
They endorsed my opponent because some of those same captains remember Eric Adams in 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care, who fought against abuse of stop and frisk, who fought against heavy-handed policing, who fought against treating our young people for marijuana arrests.
Okay.
So, of course, they knew that Eric is going to be a voice that is not going to allow this to happen.
We'll leave that there. Sally.
All right, thank you, Mr. Adams. Ms. Garcia, a centerpiece of your plan is a gun buyback program that would pay $2,000 per gun, 10 times more than what the city offers now. Why wouldn't this fuel the flow of even more illegal guns on the streets of New York City if they could be sold at such a profit?
We have a gun crisis in the city of New York. We have seen an uptick in violence, and we've gone from a pandemic to an epidemic of crime. I'm going to use every tool in the toolbox, including the gun buyback program, but also an expansion of the gun suppression division of the NYPD, including having neighborhood policing where they actually have the time to engage and rebuild trust. So we have the clearance rates of the crime that's occurring. And I've committed to getting 10,000 guns off the streets of New York. And I know that many agree with me that gun buybacks work. The Attorney General was out this past weekend making sure that there was a gun buyback program happening in Queens. I am the mayor who is going to deliver for New Yorkers, to deliver safer streets, to deliver a more livable New York City, because I have been doing the work for the last 14 years, serving you, and that is the mayor that you deserve.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Ms. Garcia. I don't think I heard an exact answer about the price, but we have to move on. Mr. McGuire, one focus of your strategy is naming a deputy mayor for public safety. How would adding another layer of bureaucracy between you and your police commissioner help to reduce crime?
It's called accountability. First, let me be very clear. New Yorkers, crime is out of control. It's up 200% in shootings. In Brooklyn, it's up 1/3, which is more than any other borough. And while Eric may be packing, and while Maya may have a specialized force for which she pays, that is not going to work. It is neither stop and frisk, nor is it defund. My plan is to make sure that we have specialized, specially trained officers who can go into the precincts, the top 10 precincts where the gun violence is occurring. That's number one. Number two, we need to make certain that those people, the intelligence that we have, we can use that intelligence. Number three, we need to go against the iron pipeline, I-95, where the guns are manufactured, and how they end up in the top 10 precincts. We also need to invest in the violence interrupters, many of whom are endorsing me because they recognize that the politicians of the past have failed. Gun violence in the neighborhood is up, and they've done nothing other than talk about stop and frisk, for
Thank
which
you.
the
Mr.
community is not
McGuire.
in favor, and or talk about defund.
Mr.
We also
McGuire,
need to make
do have to
certain.
move on. I'm sorry, time is up, but I did want to just do a quick follow-up. How is it accountability if it's someone else other than you? If it's
Because
another-
today, this administration has essentially abdicated their accountability for what takes place with law enforcement. My deputy mayor for law enforcement for public safety would be directly involved in the day-to-day management of the NYPD, and New Yorkers directly involved in the neighborhood so that we
All
can.
right,
address
Okay,
these
McGuire.
thank you.
Thank you, sir. Alan?
Can I get actually a?
Ms.
Yeah,
Wiley, I'll
I
give you
think we-
15 seconds, and then you could, please, go ahead.
So, we're having the wrong conversation about public safety, and we can name call all we want, but it doesn't change the fact that when Justin Wallace, the 10-year-old boy who was shot and killed in Far Rockaway, had a community vigil, the community vigil was sponsored by violence interrupters who said, we can keep
Okay.
our people safe if we address
All right.
trauma and
Okay,
mental
Ms. Wiley.
health. That
Okay.
starts
Thank
today.
you.
Okay.
That is public safety.
Question will
Then,
continue with
by the
Alan.
way,
Alan.
defund the police
you.
doesn't
We're
solve
going to have
that.
to move on,
Yeah.
candidates. All right, Alan?
Ms. Morales, esta pregunta es para usted. Do
Por
you
favor.
want to cut the NYPD budget in half and create a new department that handles mental health, homelessness, and drug use? But that takes time, and voters say they're worried about the rise in crime today. How do you make New Yorkers safer on day one?
Thank you for the question. The first thing I'll say is actually that the reality of it is that the NYPD budget is much bigger than the $6 billion operating line that is often talked about in the media. It's much closer to $11 or $12 billion. And I have called for, yes, a reduction of $3 billion in the NYPD budget. We have the largest budget for our police force in the country, if not in the world. If there were a correlation between policing and public safety, we'd be the safest city in the world. But the reality of it is we have got to move away from these systems that oppress our communities. We know that policing is not keeping us safe. All of the violence is happening under their watch. We have to stop doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's the definition of insanity. We have the opportunity here to create a community first responders department that will provide responses that are appropriate to the crisis, responses for homelessness, responses for mental health issues, responses for substance abuse. These are the issues that our city is plagued by right
you,
now,
Ms.
and that's
Morales.
what we need to address.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ms. Morales. Mr. Stringer, you want to slash $1 billion from the NYPD, but during your 8 years as the city's fiscal watchdog, you did not advocate for cuts of this magnitude. Why didn't you raise these concerns before you were running for mayor?
Well, first of all, as a kid who grew up here in the 1970s in Washington Heights, I remember when there were 2,000 murders a year, and I remember our community being a roving crime scene. So I want to say first and foremost, as mayor, I'm not taking my kids or any kids back to those days. What I'm advocating for is pretty simple. It's about chewing gum and walking at the same time. We do have to have a police response, meaning we have to take senior officers and focus on the hotspots where the guns and the crime is happening. We have to up the clearance rate, just what I've advocated for as a candidate for mayor. We're at an all-time low of 26%. We also have to make sure that we attack the bureaucracy at One Police Plaza, which has grown 76% over the last many years. And we have starved the precincts, not just of police resources, but also the violence interrupter programs, the community programs that actually keep kids out of the criminal justice system. I suggested cutting $265 million per year and reinvesting it in the programs that keep kids away from the criminal justice system. So it's not $1 billion a year. It's $1 billion. It's 265 over 4 years.
I'm not sure we heard an answer as to why you didn't raise these concerns until more recently.
I have
but we're
been talking about these issues for many, many years, and at forums, when it came time to be mayor, it was time to get specific. And when I was asked, I gave the response.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stringer. Mr. Donovan, last month you attended a small protest in honor of George Floyd, where at one point, a leader of your group used a megaphone to shout at some members of the NYPD, using words like pigs and racists. You were silent. As mayor, would you continue to participate in similar protests?
I condemn those words, and I want to be clear. At this moment, we need a police department that is focused on two clear things. both reducing violence and guns in our city and making sure that we have respect for every single New Yorker, especially in our Black and brown communities. To reduce gun violence and to create safety, we need to make sure that our police are focused on doing exactly that, not asking them to be mental health experts with our homeless or patrol the hallways of our schools. We also need to make sure that we're investing in the solutions in our communities that break the cycle of mental health and violence that we're seeing on our streets and on our subways. When I was housing commissioner, I created a program to help folks coming out of Rikers get housing and services they needed. Years later, the vast majority, over 90%, were stably housed, getting back to work, and hadn't reoffended. It's now been replicated in almost
Donovan,
30 cities around the country.
Yes or no?
That's the kind of work that I would do as mayor.
Mr. Donovan, yes or no, please, would you continue to participate in similar protests?
I was clear that those are not my words. I condemn any kind of hatred
Okay.
at
I guess we're not
anyone in our
getting a
community.
yes or no, so
But
we're
this
gonna-
is a
we're gonna
broader
move on.
question about policing
Okay.
and
Thank you.
about how we
Thank you,
reduce
Mr. Donovan.
violence in
All
our
right,
city.
candidates, we're going to
and
move
our
on with a
streets.
quick lightning round at this point. A few questions, looking for fast answers. A show of hands on this first one. Police officers on the subway. Raise your hand if you believe there should be more officers on trains and platforms. All right. So acknowledging here, Mr. Stringer, Ms. Morales, Ms. Wiley have not raised their hands. All the other candidates have raised their hand. More officers on trains and platforms. Education, another show of hands, candidates. Raise your hand if you would support a longer school day to make up for the learning loss that has occurred because of the pandemic. All right, again, those Ms. Morales and Mr. Stringer have not raised their hands. All the other candidates have raised their hands on a longer school day to address the pandemic. This question for all of you, Bill de Blasio asked you for a role in your administration. What job would you give him? And we're looking for a short answer, please. We'll begin with you, Mr. Adams.
I would sit down with the mayor and ask the question, what would you have done differently? Just as I've asked over 270 professional in different industry areas.
All right.
Because when you're looking in the rearview mirror, you learn a lot. And I would sit down and say, what would you have done differently?
So you can't name a current role that you would give him?
I wouldn't hire him
Okay.
in administration, but I would seek to get advice as I do with all the previous mayors.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Ms. Garcia.
I would not hire him into my administration.
Mr. Stringer.
You know, it's bad if the de Blasio alumni won't hire him, so why should I? The reality is I wouldn't hire him, but I
Okay.
do agree with Eric that when you have an
Okay.
ex-mayor, ex-elected officials, I
All
certainly
right.
would want
Thank you,
to
Mr.
sit down with
Stringer.
him.
Mr. McGuire.
I would not hire him. I would ask him how he thought his pre-K program was progressing and what he could have done differently or what he could have done better.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Ms. Wiley.
You know, this is one of those questions that I get sad when we get asked in these debates because Mayor de Blasio is term limited. He's no longer going to be the mayor. And the only issue is what we're going to do for the people of the city of New York. And what I am going to do is bring down class sizes. I'm going to keep people safer by
Okay, Ms.
recognizing we need greater police accountability.
So, Ms. Wiley,
I
would you
will have
consider him
narrow
for any
control.
role in administration? Should he ask for one?
I am not going to offer a position to the mayor
Okay,
who
thank
has
you, Ms.
not
Wiley.
asked for one either.
Mr. Donovan.
My answer is no. At this moment where we're rebuilding from crisis, we need change in this city. We need to move away from the politics of the past 8 years of
Okay.
a mayor who's demonized and divided us.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Looking for a
we
short
need
answer.
new leadership in this city.
All right, thank you.
not
Ms.
to go
Morales?
back.
I really wish we would act, honestly, I really wish we would move away from this ongoing sort of bashing of the current mayor. I would not offer him a position. I think it's time for us to look forward and think about how it is we need to transform the city so that we can meet the needs and the demands of New
All
Yorkers.
right, thank you, Ms. Morales.
today.
Mr. Yang.
People are looking for a change. He wouldn't want a job in my administration. I wouldn't give one to him.
Okay, thank you. Melissa?
Okay, many New Yorkers feel that homelessness and mental illness on the streets have gotten worse in recent years, and it's been compounded by the pandemic. Billions of dollars have been spent on housing, shelters, and outreach over the decades, and yet here we are. What is one specific, tangible thing you would do that has not been tried before? You each have 1 minute. We begin with you, Mr. McGuire.
What has not been tried before, New Yorkers, is to build truly affordable housing. Today, we have 50 to 60,000 or so New Yorkers who are homeless. Those who are homeless families, somewhere between 25 and 30,000. Those who are homeless men, 15,000, and homeless women because of abuse are in the streets. The shelter system does not work, has not worked, because many New Yorkers who are homeless decide they don't want to go into shelter. So my plan is to go from homelessness to home ownership. 350,000 units, 10,000, 10% more than what we built today. What has not been done over this administration and over many of the prior administrations is to build deeply affordable homes. What has been done is build homes that are well north of what New Yorkers can afford. New Yorkers should not have to pay more than 30% of their income in rent. We have examples like this today in the Bronx called the Bronx Commons. I would replicate those kinds of complexes which work. Those people pay formerly homeless up to the people who can pay a lot more.
Thank
but
you,
at
Mr.
least
McGuire.
they have shelters over their head, roofs
Thank
over
you.
their heads.
Mr. Stringer, one specific thing you would do that has not been tried before.
We talk a lot about homelessness, but we never talk about providing a home. And I would do that with my housing plan. Both Bloomberg and de Blasio built more housing for people who make over $150,000 a year or more than for people who make $40,000 or $30,000. And what do we have to show for it? A homeless crisis, the likes we've never seen, where we're now spending $3.2 billion managing a failed system. We used to be spending 8 years ago $1.6 billion. It's out of control. How would I do it? Here's the specifics. First of all, it's called universal affordable housing. Any new development would set aside 25% for truly affordable housing. That's part one. Part two is I would return thousands of vacant property that the city owns back to the people, to community-based organizations, working with neighborhood people to create a housing plan with a redirected subsidy that would build the housing that we actually need. This is not an original idea. LaGuardia did it with public housing. And then we built Mitchell-Ama housing. Koch gave abandoned buildings back to communities. This
Thank you,
mayor
Mr.
made a
Stringer.
deal with luxury developers to build affordable housing. That
Thank you,
changes
Mr.
on day
Stringer.
one when I'm mayor.
Ms. Garcia.
We have had a shelter first program rather than a housing first program. Under my mayoralty, we are going to get people out of shelters and into homes because housing heals. It makes it possible for you to get an education, to get a job. But we have to build affordable housing, and I'm committed to 50,000 units of affordable housing, as well as 10,000 units of supportive housing for those who are suffering from mental illness or from substance abuse. We also need to increase the voucher that the city gives to people to something close to the market. There was recent legislation passed, and I'm very excited that it should go into effect. You know, I am not running to get the title of mayor. I am running to do the job of mayor because New York City needs someone who is going to roll up their sleeves and solve the impossible problems. And that's why the New York Times and the Daily News and Planned Parenthood and the League of Conservation Voters and Streets PAC endorsed me.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Mr. Adams, do you have an idea of how to solve this problem that has not yet been tried?
This is not a political conversation. For me, it's a personal one. I say it over and over again, growing up as a child in South Jamaica, Queens, carrying a garbage bag full of clothing to school every day because my mother thought we were going to be thrown out as children. And she did not want us to be embarrassed by not having a change of clothing. Turning that corner, hoping not to see the marshals there to throw us out. I know we can solve this homeless problem. First, we need to break it down into the categories that they are, children and families. Let's keep them in their homes. Hooray to the city council for lifting the vouchers. Second, single adults. We can retrofit our hotels in the outer borough, turn them into kitchenette, a new version of SRO, and then let's go deal with our street homelessness. Those are mental health illnesses. Fountain House, I am going to invest heavily in programs like that because they're cost effective, wraparound services, supportive housing, building that trust between street homelessness and everyday New Yorkers. We can turn this problem around.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. I just want to make it clear, Mr. Yang, you're up next. This question is about street homelessness and mental illness on the streets. Your approach, something that hasn't been tried before.
This question is so important because the fact is mentally ill, homeless men are changing the character of our neighborhoods. A woman my wife Evelyn is friends with in her mom group in Hell's Kitchen was punched in the face by a mentally ill man. Sent a picture of her bruised face around the mom group, spread like wildfire. This is happening in New York City and we're not talking enough about it. Families are leaving as a result. In East Harlem, the neighborhood has been changed. Upper West Side, the neighborhood has been changed. We owe our people and our families better than this. And I'm frustrated by the political nature of these responses. I mean, we're not talking about housing affordability. We're talking about the hundreds of mentally ill people we all see around us every day on the streets and the subways. We need to get them off of our streets and our subways into a better environment. And when you ask what I'm going to do differently, I'm going to rebuild the stock of psych beds in our city, because the number's gone down 14%. It should be going up 100% until there are resources necessary for anyone who's mentally ill to not be on our streets. It's not right for them. It's not right for our city. There will be no recovery until we resolve this. I will fix this, New York.
Thank you, Mr. Yang.
That is the greatest non-answer I've ever heard in all of our debates. Not one specific idea, not one specific plan. You started out this campaign talking about using hotels. Now you're into psych beds. How much is this going to cost, if I could ask you? That's the real question.
Scott,
you have
how much
any
is it going,
idea?
Scott,
Do you have
how much
any
is it going
idea
to
on the
cost
amount?
if families leave
I will,
because of the quality
I will
that you're
tell
seeing
you.
around us?
Let me tell
I can't believe you're attacking me
tell
on this,
you how
Scott.
much
You
it
think
would
we can't
cost, 'cause
afford this?
This is a teaching moment.
We can't
You
afford
just-
not to do this,
You
Scott.
can't
Talk
just
over
walk
each
up
other,
and
we
say,
can hear you.
psych beds for all. This is not how the next mayor has to comport themselves. We need specifics.
All right. Ms.
Okay,
Morales.
Ms. Morales, you're up. Thanks.
Please, thank you. So the first thing I want to say about this is that, just to be clear, mental illness and mental health challenges are not crimes. And we have to make sure that we're separating those things. In terms of housing, I have spent over a decade making sure to connect homeless LGBT youth, homeless foster care youth, homeless people with mental illness, homeless people with substance abuse to housing. We have not made the commitment that we need to make to ensure that we are providing housing as a human right and housing for everyone. The first thing we need to do is to move away from the $3 billion that we currently invest in our shelters and begin to invest those dollars in the creation of permanent, affordable, really affordable housing for all people, right? Because Andrew's talking about the people that are afraid and that are leaving, but the people that are actually suffering deserve the kind of care and attention just as much as anyone else. And we need to prioritize providing those services for them. And that's the experience that I have, and that's what I would provide as mayor of New York City.
Thank you, Ms. Morales. Mr. Donovan, we know that you're an expert in housing, but what most street homeless people want is often for outreach workers who engage them to just go away. What would you do differently to bring those people indoors?
Well, you're right. This is the issue that called me to public service 3 decades ago. And I'm outraged that we have more people sleeping on our streets, in our subways, in our shelters than we've had since the Depression. First thing we need to do is keep people in their homes. There's billions of dollars of rental assistance available from the federal government, but we haven't put it to work quickly to keep people in their homes. Second, we need to make sure that we are focused on the problem of housing, not shelter. We need to reimagine our right to shelter as a right to housing and put that first. You know, I was talking to Charmian today when I was giving out meals with City Relief. She's afraid as a domestic violence survivor to go into shelter, shared shelter where she's at risk. And the third thing we need to do is connect that housing to services. It's called supportive housing. I would build 2,000 more units of it a year. This is exactly how we made so much progress when I led the homelessness strategy for President Obama. We ended veteran homelessness in 80 cities. Mental health and housing can help with supportive housing.
Ms. Wiley, it can take hundreds of engagements with a homeless individual to coax them indoors. The city claims to have brought in 4,200 homeless people from the streets in recent years. What would you do that they haven't already tried?
You know, look, Shams DeBaron, who was one of the men at the Lucerne on the Upper West Side, is someone I've talked too much about this and is in housing right now, had been homeless, street homeless, substance addicted, when the response was to send more police into the subways where he was riding because the congregate shelters were so dangerous. He asked for help, and what he got was handcuffed and taken to jail. And our largest psychiatric facility in this city is Rikers Island. So let me just say right now that the premise is wrong, because we have the ability to do outreach in the right way, but we simply have to use the right people. And the more we fail to recognize that we're spending $480,000 a year on that psychiatric facility we call Rikers, we're missing how we end street homelessness. I am the only candidate who has a subsidy program that will subsidize the rent for every New Yorker family of 3 earning $54,000 or less.
Thank you, Ms.
So
Wiley.
you don't pay more than 30% of your rent
Thank you.
on income on rent.
And by the way, how do you pay for that?
I pay for it with relief dollars that it's coming from the stimulus package and the savings we get because we spend $3 billion, up to $80,000 a year on putting people in congregate shelters that are dangerous, that they
All right.
don't want to be in and don't provide support services. And we already talked
Okay,
about
Ms. Wiley,
Rikers,
thank you.
All right, Ms.
Wiley, we have to
$480,000
move.
a year, more than
We have
any
to move
other
on with our
city to
question,
house
Ms. Wiley. Alan
who have
Villafani.
not been
Thank you.
convicted of a
With
crime.
Alan.
Thank you, Ms. Wiley. Coming out of the pandemic, a lot of undocumented New Yorkers are struggling. And we might not know how much they're struggling because they're often afraid to come forward. What's the biggest risk to undocumented people living in New York City, and how do you propose to solve it? You have 1 minute answer, and Ms. Wiley, I start with you.
Well, you know, as a civil rights lawyer who is proud to help get past the first sanctuary city law in this city, I'm going to start with understanding, one, that when I have mayoral control of the New York City Police Department, there will be no support or help for ICE in preventing any of our people from getting the services and supports they need. But I'm also the candidate that recognizes so much of who our essential workers were, who didn't get a dime in relief. I am so proud that Albany has fixed that thanks to the activism of organizers. But look, I have a plan called the Universal Care Plan that's going to create $5,000 grants each year to put in the pocket of the neediest New Yorkers. And people who do not have papers in this city are still our residents and will be eligible for this program, and a health plan, because those are some of the top costs of living, includes childcare, so we'll have universal drop-off centers as well, but also health care, because we have 600,000 New Yorkers who don't have a health insurance card. I'm going
Thank
to
you,
create
Ms.
a city
Wiley.
health insurance plan for undocumented immigrants.
Thank you. Mr. Donovan.
You know, in a year when we've lost more than 30,000 of our neighbors, our immigrant communities have been disproportionately devastated. I've seen it in working to recover from crisis again and again, that those who are most vulnerable before a crisis hits are always hurt the worst by it. So we do need to lead with healthcare. I have a true public option that would be available to all the folks who lack healthcare in our city, more than 300,000 undocumented folks included. But we also need to make sure that we're dealing with the underlying disparities that led to the disproportionate death in our immigrant communities and our Black and brown communities in New York. My 15-minute neighborhoods plan would make sure that every New Yorker has, within 15 minutes of their front door, everything they need for opportunity: a good school for their kids, a job that sustains their family, housing they can afford, but also the health care that they need, fresh food, parks to play, and all of the things that really go to the underlying disparities in
Thank you,
healthcare
Mr.
that we
Donovan.
see again and again in our immigrant communities.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Ms. Morales, what is the biggest risk to undocumented people living in New York City, and how do you propose to solve it?
So the reality of it is that, you know, folks associated with this administration talk about having created a sanctuary city. But the truth of it is that we have not done that. We have failed our undocumented essential workers tremendously. And that's why I was proud to stand with the excluded essential workers in advocating for a state fund to help provide some economic relief. We've got to recognize that those are the very people that made it possible for so many of us to work comfortably from home at the height of the pandemic. So the state fund is great, but it's not enough. We need to extend those protections further. We need to make sure that we are truly decoupling ICE from all of our city agencies and services, and rebuilding and regaining the trust of these workers who made it possible for us to survive. That includes not just economic relief, it includes access to health care. And I've also advocated for giving them the right to vote in municipal elections, because we have to recognize what they contribute to our city, what they contribute to our economy,
Thank
and
you,
the
Ms.
value that they
Morales.
bring to
Thank
New
you.
York.
Mr. Yang, what do you have to say to the undocumented community?
The single biggest problem facing the undocumented community right now, sorry, got it. The single biggest danger is poverty, where right now we're missing 500,000 jobs. And so if you were putting food on the table in another way, right now, maybe that restaurant or business doesn't have a need for you and you have nowhere to turn. So priority number one is to try and get our economy revved up again, get some of the 66 million tourists back who supported 300,000 of the 500,000 missing jobs, many of which would be filled by undocumented immigrants. But we need to do more. I proposed $1 billion in cash relief to everyone in extreme poverty, which would overlap very heavily with the undocumented community. I proposed a People's Bank that would channel hundreds of millions of dollars into minority and Black and brown owned businesses in many of these communities directly, because the corporate giants are not going to be investing in that way. And we need to get them connected to basic financial services, because right now they're getting exploited by check cashing fees, money lending fees, remittance fees. We can get them bank accounts. And ID NYC, and a lot of them don't trust it. A lot of them are like, oh, if I show up, I'm going to run into issues. If we get them basic financial services, we can keep more of their money in their pockets. It should not be so expensive to be poor.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. Mr. Adams.
In fact, it is expensive to be poor in New York City. And when you think about it, the days I spent with our essential employees, a substantial number of them were undocumented. They were delivering our Uber Eats. They were stocking our stores. They were out in the streets, keeping our city running. And so what we must do, I believe at the heart of this, cities are made up of agencies. And if those agencies fail, it doesn't matter how much money you put into the city. And that's the problem. We must have immediate translation services to assist that people can have access to the services that are already available. We have to expand NYC Care to make sure everyone has health care. We need to make sure we have proper translation services in our schools so that we can start building out the future as well. And I too take my hat off to the state Senate. That was the right thing to do, because when an immigrant walks into the store and buy a loaf of bread, no one asks, what is your documentation to charge you those taxes?
Ms. Garcia, do you know the undocumented community, and what could you tell them?
I too am thankful to the state for giving us the $2 billion that is going to make it so there's immediate cash relief in people's pockets. We have to end our relationship with ICE and actually live up to being a sanctuary city. And how government chooses to design programs matters. When I was responsible for emergency food, there was no request for documentation. All you had to do was say you were COVID impacted and you couldn't go out, and we delivered you food, whether or not you went to a school or whether or not you needed it delivered at home. This is what we need to do for health insurance, to expand New York City Cares. This is what we need to do in all of our schools across the city so that families feel welcomed. Because, you know, one of the facts is if your mother is literate, you are more likely to be successful in school. This is the type of mayorality I'm going to run, because this is what you deserve as New Yorkers, someone who rolls up their sleeves, wakes up early,
Thank you, Ms. Garcia.
and makes it so that we deliver for you.
Mr. Stringer, what is the biggest risk to undocumented people living in New York City, and how can you help?
The biggest risk right now is city government's inability to actually run the programs and make the systemic change necessary. I talk about the lack of affordable housing. That's real for undocumented workers. I talk about an education system that is not meeting the needs of the children of frontline workers, undocumented workers, who literally risk their lives every day. Many died to make sure the rest of us had food. It wasn't government doing the heavy lifting. It was actually the people in the streets who, for very few dollars, protected us. We do not protect the prevailing wage in this city. We do not do the work to ensure that wages are fair. As mayor, I'm going to make sure that that happens, because as controller, I debarred 70 contractors who did not pay those wages to the people who needed the most. And also, we have to have real programs. Andrew's fake UBI program would only be about $5 a day for people who are poor in the city. That's 6% of the population. It's not universal. It's not affordable. There's no way to pay for it. And it would come at the expense of the safety net. Now, we have money coming from the federal government, but that money is not here permanently. And we're going to have to make sure the programs have lasting impact.
1 second. You directly mentioned Mr. Yang. Do you want to respond for about 10 seconds?
That's a lot of money for someone who's right at that line between staying in their home or not being able to put food on their table. And direct cash relief has been demonstrated to be a massive success in alleviating extreme poverty in other environments. There's just
Okay.
a new study that said that my plan would reduce
All right, Mr.
extreme
Yang,
poverty by
just wanted to give you
60% in
five-
New York
Can
City.
I-
Okay, Mr. we have to go. Mr. McGuire. We have to.
$5
Mr. Stringer, Mr. Stringer, I'm sorry, gentlemen.
People.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry. We need to give Mr. McGuire a chance to answer that question.
Mr.
Mr. McGuire.
Can you just repeat the question,
Sure.
please? Because you have a lot of the politicians talking, and I'm not a politician, so sometimes it's difficult for me to repeat answers that don't
Sure, sir.
apply to respond to the question.
Coming out of the pandemic, a lot of undocumented New Yorkers are struggling. We may not know how much they're struggling because they are often afraid to come forward. What's the biggest risk to undocumented people living in New York City, and how could you propose to solve it?
Let us be very clear. The problems that we're experiencing now are problems that existed before COVID, and all those who spent however many years in government all of a sudden have a plan to how we're going to address this. The challenges have existed and they got exacerbated by COVID. They got exposed by COVID. So what do we need to address? We need to address the basics that all New Yorkers have come to expect. Yes, we're in a sanctuary city. We do not govern ourselves the way that suggests a sanctuary city should govern. Safety. Undocumented don't feel safe. Jobs. We've lost however many jobs. In the Bronx, we're 15 to 20% unemployment. Healthcare. We don't provide adequate healthcare. We clearly do not provide adequate education, and we clearly do not provide homes. So the undocumented, like many of the documented in the underserved communities, have not been served, and we need to have a plan to do that. And my plan to focus on jobs, the greatest, most inclusive economic comeback in the history of this city, is designed specifically those who've been excluded, like the undocumented,
Thank you,
to get
Mr.
included.
McGuire.
No job, no city, no job, no
Thank you.
dignity. It applies to
All
the
right, Mr. McGuire,
undocumented as
thank
well
you.
as it does to the documented.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. All right, candidates, we're going to give you each 30 seconds to answer this question. You will all get that allotted time, so keep that in mind as I ask it. But what is the worst idea you've heard from another candidate? And we're going to mix up the order. We're going to begin with you, Mr. Yang.
The worst idea I've heard from another candidate was Eric Adams' advice to bring a firearm to church as a public safety measure. I think it speaks for itself.
Mr. Adams, we were scheduled to go to you next. There you go.
UBI, it went from UBI that Mr. Yang had, then it went to Borough Bucks, then it went to Monopoly money, then it went to Hope and Prayer. You know, we have to have real solutions for real New Yorkers like my New York City cares.
Ms. Garcia, worst idea you've heard from another candidate in 30 seconds.
To be quite honest with you, these are complicated times, and several of my opponents are using hashtags to hashtag defund the police. I just don't think that's the right approach. You need to sit down and really think through these things.
Mr. Stringer?
I like Andrew personally, but I have to say the two craziest ideas I heard was TikTok houses for artists and then a casino on Governor's Island. I lost it after that, and so did my kids.
That wasn't a policy. That was just my suggesting something dramatic that might generate revenue for the city.
All right.
Wasn't a good idea, my friend.
Let's move on. Mr. McGuire.
Yeah, I've heard it from a couple of the candidates here who are trying to pander to what they think the voters want to hear. It is called the defund the police. As the way they've described it, will end up in disaster for New Yorkers.
Ms. Wiley, worst idea you've heard from another candidate.
So my godson, who is 6'3", 6'3" tall, black and beautiful, I've had to accompany him to court for riding his skateboard while black. I've had to accompany him to court for sitting in a park while black. And the worst idea I've ever heard is bringing back stop and frisk and the anti-crime unit from Eric Adams, which 1 is racist, 2 is unconstitutional, and 3 didn't stop any crime, and 4, it will not happen in a Wiley administration.
10 seconds, Mr. Adams.
You don't have to worry about danger when you have private security on your block. I don't and never will allow stop and frisk to be returned and abuse people. I know real solution for real people in New York is you have private security. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff.
Ms. Wiley?
Eric Adams is feeling the momentum, and let me just say that the important issue for New Yorkers that everyone understands that public safety is broad, complex, and it means making sure we're spending our dollars wisely, and I will have a moral budget that protects all our people.
Let's be very clear for Black and brown communities, neither defund the police nor stop and frisk.
You don't
nor
speak for
private
Black and brown
security.
communities. How dare you assume to speak for Black and brown
Because I
communities
talk to
as
Black
a
and brown
monolith?
communities. 'Cause
You
I talk to
cannot
them.
do that. You cannot do that.
Oh, I
The
can. Yes,
defund
I can. I
movement
just did.
actually was started
You know what?
by young
I
Black
just
and
did
brown
do it.
people.
You know what? I just did do it.
You
You know
can't
what
erase
other-
them in
Candidates
that
can't
way.
talk over
That's
each
not
other.
your
I'm
truth.
gonna do
is
it
not the
again.
truth for the community as a whole.
I'm going to do it again. Black and brown communities do not want either defund or
You
stop
are
and
not
frisk. Full
speaking
stop.
for all Black and brown communities because I am a member of that community, and you are certainly not speaking for me.
Okay, let's
also
exclude
think we
you.
have-
All right.
Let's
we have-
exclude
we have-
you.
let's
then.
Candidates,
Well, let's not
I need to
exclude
stop you,
me.
candidates, only because we need to give you, Ms. Morales, and you, Mr. Donovan, a chance to answer that original question. Worst idea you've heard from another candidate. Mr. Donovan?
Look, I don't think you tuned in tonight to hear us attack each other. So I want to talk about an idea I haven't heard in this campaign, and that's equity bonds to solve the racial wealth gap in our city. Every child born in our city should get $1,000 into an account when they're born, and every year, depending on their income, up to $2,000 more. That means a child born into poverty in our city would graduate with almost $50,000 in an account to pay for college, to buy a home, to start a business. If we really want to make this city more equal and more fair,
Mr. Donovan,
we need
that's
a
30
plan to
seconds.
attack the racial wealth gap.
All right, and just to be clear, you do not want to identify the worst idea you've heard from another candidate. That was your 30 seconds. Just kidding.
I've heard a lot of bad ideas
All
focused on, but I don't
Thank you.
think that's why folks.
Ms. Morales, that question goes to you.
Thank you. On May 29th, 2020, I watched in horror as both of my children were pepper sprayed by the NYPD. Within an hour and a half, I watched in horror again as my son was physically assaulted by the NYPD. At the time, we were all together exercising our civil rights. So one of the things that I think is highly problematic is the idea of, first of all, rejecting and attempting to represent the Black and brown community in terms of defunding the police, and where what I've called for is divesting and
Ms.
investing.
Morales.
And the second thing is flooding our subways with more police officers to address the social issues of
Ms. Morales, thank you.
homelessness
All right.
and mental illness.
That's 30 seconds. Thank you, Ms. Morales. Candidates, we have this question. We're looking for short answers if you could, but with just a few words, tell us the one problem facing the city that you really don't feel you've figured out how to solve yet. We'll start with you, Mr. McGuire.
The one problem facing the city that we have not solved is education. If I look at what's taking place in the borough of Brooklyn, 7 out of 10 of our children do not read at grade level.
All right,
We
Mr.
spend
McGuire.
$27,000 a year educating
Thank you, Mr. McGuire.
unsuccessfully our children and
We just need short answers there. Thank you,
$446,000
Mr.
a year
Mr.
keeping
McGuire,
an
thank you.
inmate at Rikers.
Thank you, Mr.
Education
McGuire.
system is
Mr.
broken.
Stranger, something that you, as you look out at the city landscape, you have just not figured out how to solve, even if you became mayor.
I think there has to be a renewed focus on taking time to listen to communities when it comes to reinvesting in neighborhoods post-COVID. We know
Okay.
that the virus discriminated, but I think so far,
right,
what we're
thank you,
seeing
Mr.
from,
Stewart.
if I may, if we're seeing from the de Blasio administration and the spending of the dollars, we're not having the conversations
All right,
necessary.
Mr.
with
Stringer, thank you. I have to move on, candidates. Looking for short answers here. Mrs. Garcia.
I have to agree with Ray. We have to make sure that we are getting our education system right and that we are doing things that make it so they go into
Ms.
careers.
Garcia, thank you. Mr. Adams.
Education, pregnancy through profession, returning the joy of learning to school.
All right, Mr. Adams, thank you. Candidates, this is a problem facing city you do not feel you've figured out how to solve. Mr. Yang.
How to get our broken bureaucracies to genuinely deliver value to us, the people and families of the city, whether it's education, sanitation, public safety,
Mr.
housing.
Yang,
on and
thank
on.
you. Ms. Morales.
You know, I think about the combined sort of climate and infrastructure transportation issues here in the city, and how it is that we leverage community groups and advocates in order to begin to solve that. I was proud to sign on to Transportation Alternatives 25 by 25 plan.
Thank you, Ms. Morales.
But I'm going to need their help in executing.
Ms. Morales, thank you. Mr. Donovan.
Look, we've still got more than 500,000 New Yorkers who are out of work. We need everyone in this city to come together to focus on our small businesses, and we need to fill our vacant storefronts, our public spaces with arts and culture. Let every New
Okay, Mr.
Yorker
Donovan.
know that New York is New York again, and let the
Thank you,
world
Mr.
know
Donovan.
that we're coming back.
Ms. Wiley, problem that you don't feel you've figured out how to solve yet.
You know, one of the things we have to create is renewable energy cooperatives in communities like Mott Haven that have 21 times the rate of asthma of any community in the city. Climate crisis we can solve, but we do have to figure out how to create renewable energy in communities so the communities are benefiting fully and actually own those businesses.
Thank you, Ms. Wiley. Candidates, thank you. Now, we're just about at the 1 hour mark of this mayoral debate. So we're going to take a brief time out. And in the next hour, we are going to tackle the city's economic recovery, the city's housing crisis, and more on mental health care. And we also have a few questions that we think everyone will enjoy. Voters, viewers at home, Channel 4 will return to regular programming. However, you can continue watching the debate live on WNBC and WNJU websites and apps, and at Politico.com and NYC Live TV. So switch over right now. We've got a lot of ground to cover. We'll be right back.
It's the most consequential election in a generation, and Kathryn Garcia is New York's best choice. Endorsed by the Daily News and the New York Times as a leader whose ideas and experience stand out, Kathryn has a plan to restart our economy, keep our neighborhoods safe, and hold police accountable. Adopted into a multiracial family, Kathryn has spent her entire career serving us.
New York is my home. I've been your crisis manager. I'm ready to be your mayor.
Paid for by Kathryn Garcia 2021.
In New York, we have one word for the desperate attacks against Eric Adams. Bull.
Eric's a proud Democrat who's been fighting his whole life for what's right.
Legalizing gay marriage and civil rights for everyone. Working to get illegal guns off our streets.
Tackling police brutality and racism.
And taking on corruption.
With greater transparency and publicly financed campaigns.
Join
in supporting Eric Adams.
A mayor for all of us. Paid for by Eric Adams 2021.
Election day is June 22nd, and the choice for mayor is clear. It's not Eric Adams, who told the New York Times he's a conservative Republican, praised Trump associate Rudy Giuliani, and has decades of corruption investigations. Andrew Yang fought to elect Democrats and deliver stimulus checks to millions of New Yorkers. He's endorsed by firefighters and Eric Adams' own police union. The choice is clear. Vote Andrew Yang between now and June 22nd. Paid for by Yang for New York.
Hey, New Yorkers, June 22nd is primary election day. And this year, instead of voting for just one person for each office, you can now rank up to 5 candidates in order of preference. It's called ranked choice voting, and it's new to New York City. To vote for your first choice, fill in their oval in the first column. Fill in the oval for your second choice in the second column. Rank up to 5 candidates. Now, even if your first choice doesn't win, you can still have a say in who does. Early voting is June 12th through the 20th. Primary day is June 22nd. Learn more at voting.nyc.
On night 4 in Omaha, reigning world champion Caleb Dressel pursues his place in Tokyo.
I hate to use the word obsession, but it's pretty much what it is. You got to be all in for what you want to do.
Here he comes! Less than 2 years after being diagnosed with cancer, Nathan Adrian's focus is now on making a 4th Olympic team.
Nathan Adrian in the pool.
Swimming just has a way of kind of sucking you in.
Nathan Adrian puts a cap on it. It's gold for the USA.
Man, I'm going to train so freaking hard so that I win every time.
It's the meet that people plan 4 years for.
And the queen of the pool is back, not just for 1, but 2 races.
Katie Ledecky smashes her own world record.
The Olympics for a swimmer, it's the ultimate goal.
Katie Ledecky swims a total of 1,700 meters in one night. And in every lane, swimmers are focused solely on punching their ticket to Tokyo.
It's just letting instinct take over.
Dressel is leaving, no doubt about it again.
I'm not thinking about anything. Training's done with. There's nothing I can do in that moment to where it's going to make me swim faster, so might as well just shut off and go.
All eyes are on the pool, and you never know just what you might see. NBC Sports welcomes you to night 4 of the U.S. Olympic swimming trials. Along the Missouri River here in Nebraska, it was 99 degrees in Omaha. It's going to go over 100 tomorrow. But inside, the water is 79.4 degrees. We double-checked to make sure, but the swimming will be smoking hot on this night. We have 4 different finals ahead. 3 semifinals with some of the big names, including Caleb Dressel. And you see Katie Ledecky's name not once, but twice. Big night for her. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Omaha. Mike Tirico, Rowdy Gaines, Michelle Tafoya, Elizabeth Beisler is going to join us as well, as Beisel is going to join us as we go through the night. So, Rowdy, Katie Ledecky and Caleb Dressel, if any two individuals were going to say they're going to win the most medals, it would be those two. They've got interesting nights. I want to start with Katie, who's in the 200 and the 1500 meter freestyle final. She's already won the 400. But why is tonight so important?
Well, this will be the toughest night of her amazing career because she's got that double. Listen, she has had this kind of program before, but she's got to take care of business tonight in Omaha. She starts with a 200 freestyle, and then an hour and 6 minutes later, she'll swim 30 lengths of the pool behind us to maybe, just maybe, punching her ticket twice in one night to Tokyo.
I know you're super excited for what Caleb Dressel has. We're going to see him most of the nights the rest of the week. Tonight in the 100, event you know a little bit about.
A little bit. Listen, he's the best swimmer on the planet. Absolutely. And it all started in Rio in 2016. It built through 13 gold medals at 2 world championships. And now we're here in Omaha. And this new journey to Tokyo starts, and it's a semifinal in the 100 freestyle. Yes, the very best event in all of swimming.
It's because this guy won it, the gold medal back there. But for Caleb, this is an interesting time because he got in the water once already just to kind of get the rust off and be ready to roll. But now it gets really serious for him.
That's right. We call that a stinger. So a couple days ago, he swam the 200 freestyle, went his best time, which was awesome, but it really set him up for a great meet coming up.
Okay, we've been saying if you win these finals, you are on the Olympic team. If you finish second, you're likely on the Olympic team. Maybe Michelle Tafoya can explain why we're using the word likely. We'll go to math teacher Michelle for the explanation.
All right, Mike and Rowdy, let's try this. There are 26 spots to fill on each of the men's and women's teams. So let's do some math. There are 14 events. If each of the top 2 finishers in each event
And we're seeing that play out on our streets and on our subways with a crisis in homelessness. The number of individuals sleeping in our streets and in shelter has doubled in the last 8 years. So we need a fundamentally different approach because it would not only save lives, it would actually save money. I could go to work, take billions of dollars of rental assistance that has been passed by Congress at this moment, get it quickly to families to keep them in their homes, and invest in supportive housing that would actually reduce the cost, not just the $3 billion we're spending each year on shelters and hotels, but the more than $400,000 per person per year we spend at Rikers. We could break the cycle.
Mr. Donovan, I'm sorry, that's time. We have to move on. Ms. Morales, why is your cash relief plan better than your opponents, and how will you pay for it? You have 1 minute.
So I'd like to actually start off by pushing back on sort of the deficit that we are facing. I think that it is absolutely true that in 2022 the budget will look different than it did in 2019. That being said, we are still the wealthiest city in the country, and we can choose to do differently with the dollars that we have access to. And I'm talking about prioritizing critical services, prioritizing affordable housing, prioritizing our schools, prioritizing economic recovery, providing jobs for people. This is a time for us to actually invest in job creation. As someone who for decades has managed organizations as an executive where I was being reimbursed at 80 cents on the dollar of our expenditures, I have experience not just in making sure I'm closing the gap and providing the highest quality services, but every agency I've ever served has been left better when I left there than it was when I got there. It is possible for us to manage our money differently and prioritize the New Yorkers that need it the most.
Thank you. Ms. Wiley, why is your plan better, and how will you pay for it? You have 1 minute.
Here's the thing. We have recovered from every crisis in this country, and what we have learned from everything from the Great Depression to the Great Recession is that we put money in people's pockets. It turns out to be a growth strategy. In fact, affordability is a growth strategy. And in this city, we are already coming back. We've had 4 months in a row of growth. We've had more revenue than we thought we would bring in this period of time. The issue is whether we're going to recover all of us, because the people we don't recover live in the South Bronx, live in Southeast Queens, live in East New York and Brownsville, and all the communities in the city that were so hard hit by COVID. So what I'm going to do is actually recognize that we need a universal care economy, help women particular get jobs by providing care they need, but also the care grants that help families care for themselves and their families, including our excluded workers. And I'm going to shift the money from both the police department and from corrections, money we will
Thank you,
save
Ms.
close to
Wiley.
Rikers to pay for it.
Thank you. We're out of time. Ms. Garcia, before I ask my next question, just a quick yes or no. Can the city afford to give cash to the poorest New Yorkers?
The city already does give cash to the poorest New Yorkers. It's called cash assistance. And we have to have an economy that is growing. That is how you deal with the budget deficit of this magnitude. We're getting $22 billion. We have to use this money smartly by investing in jobs for our young people.
Thank you. Ms. Garcia, you say you are the most capable manager on this stage tonight. Yet when you were asked to cut your sanitation budget during the pandemic, you said you couldn't and you resigned. You'll be faced with far bigger cuts than that as mayor. So how specifically would you identify $5 billion to close the gap?
I knew in the height of COVID that keeping the city clean and safe was imperative, that we could not take away the services from New Yorkers because then we wouldn't come back. And every family needs to be safe in the city and feel like it's a clean city. And I have confronted budgets before. When I was at the Department of Environmental Protection, I cut $100 million out of the operating budget by being smart about it without a layoff. Because when you come together with labor and management, you can actually achieve real success in this area. But I also know that we need to make smart investments in the city, that we need to have workforce training and use some of that $22 billion so that we are creating good jobs in the future and future taxpayers, to be quite honest with you. This is a moment where we have a real gift that we need to make use of. So I am ready to roll up my sleeves and get that work done.
That's the end of time, but I'd just like to quickly follow up because I don't know that I heard a specific plan to close the $5 billion budget cap. Could you give us one example of something you would do?
Certainly. So we have to be more efficient. As I have said previously, we have overlapping IT offices, for example. We have cybersecurity, we have a digital technology, we have a commissioner. These are areas I would look to streamline. In addition, we need to sit down with labor and work on real productivity changes. You share the benefit, but you get specific savings.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Garcia. We're going to turn to you, Mr. Adams. To balance the budget, you've called for a hiring freeze and annual cuts to city agencies. You'll also need the unions to pitch in. You've been endorsed by some of the city's largest, including District Council 37. What would you demand from these unions?
First, living poor is something I know about very clearly. And we do have waste and mismanagement in government. I call for a 3 to 5% cut in every agency, pegs. I call for a hiring freeze and no furloughs. Why? Because when you look at who's laid off on those furloughs, they're majority Black and brown women. Many of them are heads of households. We could come to the table and ensure that we can finally end the dysfunctionality of our city. Our agencies are dysfunctional. We create our crises. The inefficiencies are creating the inequities that we're experiencing. I saw that as a child, and I'm seeing it as an adult. We have fat in our agencies. We will find it, and we will cut, and we will be more efficient on how we run this city.
And just a quick follow-up, anything that you would ask for from the unions?
Yes, the same way we did in the 70s. We would sit down at the table and determine, help them. When I speak to my heads of my unions and my members in the unions, they know exactly where the fat is in the agencies. They know where the inefficiencies are in the agencies. Why not create that partnership to identify those inefficiencies so we can start making sure our agencies protect those low-income New Yorkers that we are failing?
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Stringer, you're supported by the city's teachers union. What specific contract changes or cuts would you require from the UFT in exchange for raises?
Well, first of all, the next mayor should not be negotiating contracts in public, and I'm not going to do that tonight. I will tell you that I have been a fiscal steward of this city. Working with the mayor's office, I refinanced $2.2 billion in debt so that we had those real savings. I do think while we have out-year budget gaps, we've also seen a $1.4 billion increase in tax revenue. And I do think with Albany Foundation aid for our schools, we're well on our way to creating a city for everyone. With that said, I have the management experience. I have the audits to show for it. I've rooted out waste and fraud in this administration, identified $1 billion in savings. I have consistently said that we have to up our savings program because in good times, that's critical. Because when COVID hit, the first thing the mayor said was cut 34,000 jobs and lay off and summer jobs for kids. That's not the answer. And the answer, Kathryn, was not to cut trash service for this city because that was a cut that was not well thought out. And the next mayor has to have government experience and agency experience to know where all the possibilities are to have a better run city.
And I just want to say,
We'll
I
let you
agree
respond.
with you, Mr. Controller. Cutting the sanitation department's budget by $100 million immediately had traumatic impact on the city. You saw it across this town. You know that we have to make sure that the city stays safe, that the city stays clean, like the kids get back to school. This is the bread and butter of local government. That is how we have a more livable city. And when I'm mayor, I will immediately restore those cuts to the sanitation budget.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Garcia. I would just like to follow up quickly with Mr. Stringer, though, because students and parents and teachers have a lot at stake in terms of your approach to negotiating a contract, and you've been controller for 8 years. So have you not suggested any potential efficiencies publicly to the UFT contract?
During the last
Can you give us just one example of something that could be changed?
During the last contract, the first day on the job, I worked to ensure that that contract was transparent, went to talk to the mayor about it, and made sure that we were well within what our budget was and the transparency that involved in it. That started my great relationship with the mayor.
Okay.
And so I have been
Thank you.
I have
Thank you,
been
Mr.
a
Stringer.
steward of the pension fund. I've been a steward
Thank
of the
you.
finances of the city, and I've
We're gonna-
identified $1 billion.
We're going to move on to Mr. McGuire. Mr. McGuire, you don't have union endorsements as some of your opponents do. In fact, a lot of your financial support comes from Wall Street. So I want to ask you this. As mayor, would you fight against tax increases for wealthy New Yorkers?
So let me be clear, New Yorkers. I'm going to invoke two of the great 21st, 20th century philosophers. What you've just heard is what either James Brown or Stevie Wonder would say, talking loud, saying nothing. You got career politicians here who clearly don't understand the basics of 101 economics and how you manage a budget. You asked the question, what are we going to do with a $5 billion budget? Nobody answered that. They talk about what else they're going to pile onto the budget. Cutting $100 million here and cutting $100 million there won't work. The only way out of this is to grow. My plan, the greatest, most inclusive economic comeback plan in the history of New York City, 500,000 jobs, 50,000 which are going to small businesses, which is the lifeblood of the city. The rest of the stuff we're talking about doesn't work. It's a budget deficit. The difference between the 70s and now, when business, government, and labor came together, there's this new thing that we've discovered that will have an impact on all the stuff that they're describing. It's called technology. So we need to make certain that we leverage the resources that we have to make certain that our best days when it comes to the budget are not behind us, and to make sure that this administration is not fiscally irresponsible, which is what they're advocating here.
All right, Mr.
in the
McGuire,
plan that
thank
they've
you.
outlined. It ain't working.
Thank
We
you,
need
Mr.
somebody who's
McGuire.
got the management experience to do this.
Okay, we're going to move on. Candidates looking for short answers here. Mayors like to leave legacy development projects, right? One revitalized Times Square, another built up the west side of Manhattan. What would be your big project? Why don't we begin with you, Ms. Wiley?
You know, one thing that we have to talk about, one is, yes, we have to create more jobs and we have to make sure they go to people who need them, which is why I have a New Deal New York plan, doubling the capital construction budget to create 100,000 new jobs, targeting and doing local targeted hiring for the communities who need them, like in the Bronx, like in the North Shore of Staten Island, so many others. But here's the thing. We also have to recognize that if we are going to sustain ourselves as a city, it also includes climate change. And so $3 billion of that budget, that $10 billion budget, includes resiliency projects that will keep us safe from
Wiley, thank
flooding
you.
and also create more transit alternatives like
Thank you.
protected bike lanes and bus
Thank you,
rapid
Ms. Wiley.
transit.
Thank you. Mr. Donovan, signature project?
You know, Climate change isn't some distant looming threat. It's here and it's real. And at this New Deal moment, where we have potentially trillions of dollars of investment from the Biden administration, just wind power alone, bringing the 21st century energy and infrastructure to our city, could benefit with more than 30,000 jobs to New Yorkers. And that's just the start. We need to make sure that with my Green Climate Corps, we're ensuring that so many communities that are hurt the worst by climate change are actually benefiting the most.
All right, Mr. Donovan.
This is an opportunity to really make New York City the
All right,
leader
Mr.
again in the
Donovan,
world, as we were under
That's
Mayor
30
Bloomberg.
seconds. Ms. Morales, any legacy development project?
Sure. I think it's hard to choose just one, but the bottom line is that I'm talking about bringing in politics for the people as part of my administration. One of the critical things is a new economy for the people. That means taking all of the money that we would historically invest in companies like Google and Amazon and investing them in our small and mid-sized businesses first, because we know that our small and mid-sized businesses employ 50% of New Yorkers, and we can grow our economy from the ground up and from the center out. That also includes creating new jobs, investing in the Urban Climate Corps, investing in the care economy, all of the workers who we know worked to make it possible for the rest of us to keep working during the pandemic.
Thank you, Ms. Morales.
It also means
Ms. Morales, we have to move on to
tackling
Mr.
education
Yang.
and providing jobs for our young people as well.
Thank you, Ms. Morales. I'll repeat the question, Mr. Yang. We're talking about a legacy development project, such as Times Square for one mayoralty. West Side of Manhattan was for another mayoralty. Any on your mind is a big legacy development project?
The legacy I want to leave is a city that's working for us and our families. And I want everyone to reflect on the fact that that's not guaranteed. But one of the ways we're going to recover is by building. I want to be a mayor that doesn't have one project in my name, but has a whole array of projects, whether it's the Queensway, which is going to redevelop 3.5 miles of defunct railroad track and turn it into a park that connects communities. It's going to elevate property values for hundreds of thousands of people in Queens, whether it's a new water tunnel to provide redundancy for drinking water in Brooklyn, because if the first water tunnel fails right now, can you imagine a scenario where there's a borough without drinking water? Like, that's realistic right now. We have to remedy that.
Thank you, Mr.
Or
Yang.
it's clean battery storage powers and clean, but I mean, you probably can. I mean, you're on that one too, Kathryn. But we need to rebuild New York City, both literally and figuratively.
Mr. Adams?
Legacies, New York City aid to put real money in the pockets of people using the earned income tax credit, but also my city. My mother was unable to provide for my siblings because she didn't have access to some of the basic services that were available. My City card would automatically sign up New Yorkers for those benefits that they are available, SCREE, DREE, and all the other services. We leave too much on the table, send too much to Washington, D.C., because we're not allowing people to navigate the complexities of government.
Ms. Garcia.
Oh, I am looking forward to an incredibly new green New York City, because climate change is an existential threat. Texas froze, California burned last year. It's happening now. We have to immediately have every school roof be a green roof that can absorb storm water, reduce the heat load, and actually be a classroom. We have to electrify 10,000 school buses. We need to turn Rikers Island into renewable Rikers with wind and solar and battery storage. This is also an opportunity for jobs in our city, for green-collar jobs for all of our youth.
Thank you.
And I know that I'm the one to deliver it because I have been delivering for this city for the last
Thank you, Ms. Garcia.
years.
Mr. Stringer, any legacy project, big project?
Yeah, I remember the night that the New York City pension funds, under my direction, divested $4 billion from fossil fuel. People said it couldn't be done, and the energy companies did everything they could to oppose me. I remember going home that night and tucking my kids into bed and looking at their faces and saying, if I do nothing else in my life, I believe that the planet will be better because of that divestment. But I'm just getting started. As mayor, the next legacy is going to be making sure that we have a solar panel on every roof, an electric battery in every basement. We're going to continue to invest in the green economy. I've doubled the green investments as controller.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer.
That's what I'm going to do for the children of this city and the future generations.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. Mr. McGuire.
The greatest, most inclusive economic comeback in the history of New York City, 500,000 jobs, infrastructure, making certain that New Yorkers have broadband, which Mrs. Wiley has promised, on which she's not delivered, making certain that we build infrastructure, asthma that exists in the Gateway Project and the BQE. We need to deal with those. and we also need to make certain that we deal with affordable housing. And in addition to that, what I would do in my greatest, most inclusive comeback plan is to invest in those MWBEs today, which have been neglected. So we got to go big, go small, go forward, small businesses and MWBEs. And we need to invest in and make certain that the education system works, because the crisis which we have today is a crisis that existed before COVID, about which they've done nothing. And so finally need somebody who doesn't, as you mentioned, owe any political favors to anyone. I'm clearly an outsider. I don't owe any political favors. I don't owe anybody anything other than my family and the Almighty.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'd
Thank
like
you.
to
Ms.
get-
Wiley, a short response, please.
Absolutely. Look, you know, I left city government 5 years ago. Very grateful to have had the opportunity when I walked in the door and the mayor said, universal broadband, that's yours. And it's something that I said, great. This is something no city in this country has ever done. And I am so grateful that I got the opportunity, one, to sue Verizon because it failed to deliver FiOS, fast-speed broadband, to all of our communities. There was a positive settlement in that, but also there was no agency for universal broadband. So showing the city
Okay,
just
Ms.
where the
Wiley.
revenue was, and pulling
you, Ms.
four
Wiley.
different agencies together to get every single apartment in Queensbridge houses free
Okay, Ms. Wiley,
broadband,
we're going to move on.
laying the plan for more. That's what I will do as mayor.
Red Hook and Mott Haven don't have any. 1.5 million
And I
New
wasn't
Yorkers.
in the administration.
1.5
I
million
laid
New
out the
Yorkers don't have
plans,
broadband under
and
your
then
watch.
not under my watch, Ray. That is a falsehood, and it has to be called out. I left the administration in 2016, and when I left, Queensbridge was being built out. We had had a public announcement both for Mott Haven, for Stapleton houses, for big developments in every single borough. I had identified the plans, the
Okay, Ms. Wiley.
resources, the revenue, including $70 million in the capital construction budget.
Yet another-
And I left
All right,
to
candidates,
chair the CCRB.
Candidates, we want to move on to an important issue here, education.
Yet another press release.
All right, we're going to move on here because we have a question here. Obviously, these are both important issues, but if you had to prioritize for you, your administration, what's more important, desegregating schools or improving the quality of schools? We'll start in this end, Mr. McGuire.
Listen, education
And
is
tell
so-
us why, please. Please explain why you make the choice.
I'm sorry?
Please, I meant to finish. I'm sorry, I didn't finish the question. Desegregating schools or improving the quality of schools, and tell us why your choice.
Thank you. Listen, this is personal to me. Education is the only way that I got here, through my mother's sacrifices. It should not be the case the way it is today, that our children's lives are determined by their zip codes. 7 out of 10 Black and brown children can't read at grade level. If I go to Brooklyn, Ericksboro, the numbers of that 7 out of 10 don't read at levels of proficiency. We cannot mathematically integrate. We need to make sure that we have the best district schools, the best parochial schools, the best charter schools, and the best magnet schools. So no, you can't mathematically integrate. Let's bring quality education to our children. Today, it's an abject failure. And there's no outrage about that which we are outraged. It should be our education system, because it is failing. They have failed our children, and we need something different today. Otherwise, $27,000 it goes to teaching our children. $5,000, you know, in some of these boroughs, we don't have crayons. $446,000 to Rikers.
Okay.
What are our priorities?
McGuire,
We need to stop today and start educating our children.
McGuire.
What I will do.
Ms. McGuire, all the candidates, I just want to hear desegregating schools or improving the quality of schools. Which one?
Improving the quality of schools, unequivocally. We cannot desegregate
Thank
the
you, Mr.
quality
McGuire.
education.
Mr. Stringer.
Look, Ray, I'm going to represent everybody else. There are people who have like real ideas and a real record of government, so I'm going to give you mine for a second. First of all, we got
Real ideas and real ideas of government where there's abject failure. Look at the results.
Listen, you want to make $50 billion on Wall Street profit and then come here and lecture the rest of us, that's fine. But I'm going to tell you about my
You want to
education
mismanage
plan.
the city's pension fund and not have any Black and brown people be your managers of 60 to 70%?
The pension fund has never been
Mr. Stringer,
busier or
respond.
better. I talked to you about that last time. But
Yeah,
you're
your
free to
numbers
ask
are
some
wrong.
questions.
They're your
It's
numbers. You
9%
need to know
Yorkers
better.
Didn't tune in tonight
Right.
to hear this kind of fighting. Let's
I know.
Okay, Mr. Donovan. All right, I will.
Sean, you missed the last debate.
Thank you. I will report about Mr. Stringer.
Okay.
What is more important, desegregating schools or improving the quality of schools? And tell us why you make the choice.
First of all, you have to integrate and you also have to build quality schools. And the way I would approach it is a couple of ways in the short time that I have. First, we need to put 2 teachers in every classroom, K to 5. We need to have equal after school for all children in all zip codes right now. After school is for the parents and the kids who can afford after school. We need universal after school. I will implement that day one as mayor. We also have to make sure that beyond that, We have to, for older kids, make sure that we have a CUNY workforce development plan so we can take advantage of the 100,000 jobs that are going to be created in the green economy. And what we also have to recognize is we have to work with local community organizations in Brooklyn and the West Side and others to make sure that we have a true integration
Mr.
in
Stringer?
the city.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Garcia, what's more important, desegregating schools or improving the quality of schools, and tell us why?
You have to have high quality schools and you have to have integrated schools. It is not a choice we should be making as New Yorkers. When I'm mayor, I'm going to open up new schools, new high schools, and have them use grade point average. We've seen this work across the country to integrate schools and improve the quality. But it has to be a cradle to career focus where we have free childcare for people making less than $70,000 so kids are ready for school, that we stop screening 4-year-olds with a test. That's insane. But that every school has art and music and theater, and that they have sports. So we are helping our kids come back from what has been an unbelievably traumatic year. We can be better. I'm a product of the public schools. I know that they can be great, but we have to be intentional about it and make sure that we are serving every single one of our precious children as we come out of this horrible
Ms. Garcia,
pandemic.
thank you. Mr. Adams.
Thank you for acknowledging my cradle to career plan.
Mr. Adams.
I like cradle to career, I have to say, and you know, I've
Thank
had
you.
my ideas stolen a few
Mr.
times
Adams.
on this stage.
Mr. Adams.
This is not professional or political, it's personal. I went to school in South Jamaica, Queens, IS-8, intermediate school, PS 140, elementary school. Then I was bused to Bayside High School. I walked into Bayside High School, and what did I see? New books, new overhead projectors, and even the floors were clean, for God's sake. And so it's imperative to have both. Part of equality education is developing the full personhood of a child and integrating in an environment with other students, with other ideas, the cross-pollination of ideas. That is what makes a great, well-rounded adult. We have to stop the criminality of young people in the city. New Yorkers, 65% of Black and brown children never reach proficiency in the Department of Education. And then even make it even worse, 55% of the men and women at Rikers Island have learning disabilities. 30% are dyslexic. 80% don't have a high school diploma or equivalency. If we don't educate, we will incarcerate.
Thank you,
And I'm
Mr.
going to
Adams.
educate.
Mr. Adams. Mr. Yang, both tough challenges for the city school system. Would your administration prioritize desegregating schools or improving the quality of schools? Tell us why.
I think you can serve both goals. I think quality and integration go hand in hand. I'm a public school parent and a special needs parent, and I can say that the vast majority of parents, you know what we want to do? We want to send our kids to a local public school that's giving them an education we're excited about that represents the diversity of our community. That's what just about every parent wants. And it's only when the school doesn't deliver that do you then start looking around and saying, oh my gosh, like what do I have to do? So we have to do a better job of making people excited about the public schools in their neighborhoods. And then we'd see different numbers in terms of integration. I do want to say that right now, we've been failing our kids for this past year in an epic way. I mean, as a public school parent, I've been frustrated. Our schools have been closed longer than they should have been, and 50% of kids are still not back in school. 29% of New Yorkers don't have high-speed internet. Who knows how their kids have been learning? So we have a lot of time to make up. Summer Rising, I think, is great if you're a parent watching this, you know, like some summer camp plus summer school hybrid, like on the city. Please do send your child. But talking about these goals at the wake of our failure for hundreds of thousands of kids strikes me as missing the priorities right now.
Okay. Ms. Morales?
So as the only former educator on this stage tonight, I can tell you that neither integration or school quality is going to improve unless we begin to dismantle the racist systems that perpetuate inequality in our school system. We need to make sure that our schools are all fully funded. We need to make sure that we are implementing culturally responsive curriculum. We need to make sure that our schools are trauma-informed healing centers. We need to make sure that our students feel seen, heard, valued, and that they recognize that they're all gifted and talented, and that our teachers understand that their primary job is to help our students identify those gifts and identify those talents. And we're not going to get there unless we confront the systems that have created and perpetuate the inequities in our school system. I know, I've seen this. I've been in our classrooms. My children graduated from the public school system. They both had learning differences. We need to be willing to confront the fundamental challenges, and that includes having teachers that are reflective of the students that they serve.
Thank you, Ms. Morales. Mr. Donovan.
This is a false choice. After a year that's hurt every one of our students and widened the inequalities that we see in our schools, we need to get our schools open safely and quickly. But we also have to make sure that everyone is recovering, particularly those who are furthest behind. My Education Recovery Corps would put thousands of young people side by side with our teachers, making sure that we not only recover academically, but also socially and emotionally from the trauma that we've seen. We also need to make sure that we're investing in schools that are working and creating them in every neighborhood under my 15-minute neighborhood plan. You know, there's nothing wrong with New York that can't be solved by what's right with New York. We have great, highly integrated schools, dual language schools, arts-based schools, STEM-based schools. We need to be growing them and creating them in every neighborhood. Finally, we need to better connect our schools to jobs. My idea for a New York City Job Corps would make sure that every single high school student has at least one paid internship by the time they graduate.
Thank you, Mr.
That would
Donovan.
really help to close the gaps in our schools.
Mr. Donovan, thank you. Ms. Wiley.
You know, I went to an elementary school that was segregated, overcrowded, and underfunded. And despite having parents who between them had 8 years of graduate education, sent me to school reading and math ready, I was at the top of my class and 2 years behind grade level. This is the wrong conversation. We can and must recognize that Brown versus Board of Education, before Brown v. Board, we said separate was equal. It wasn't. After Brown, we have recognized that a quality education is also an integrated education because we learn from one another, improve our critical thinking skills, and we make this society more cohesive. Look, I am going to end every discriminatory admissions practice in the system, but I'm also going to hire 2,500 more teachers so that we are bringing overcrowded classroom class sizes down, particularly focused on early childhood and K through 5. And we're going to have trauma-informed care in our schools. We're going to stop ignoring that our kids need supports, and we have to educate the whole child.
Thank you, Ms. Wiley. People who care for the homeless and also some people who are concerned about crime agree that there is not a functioning mental health system in New York City. Prisons and shelters have largely assumed that role. How would you restructure the city's mental health system specifically? We've heard you already talk about affordable housing. How would you restructure the city's mental health system to address the crisis of homelessness on the streets? You each have 60 seconds to answer the question. We'll begin with you, Mr. McGuire.
Thank you. We clearly have identified this as one of the most pressing issues, and we have not invested. I would invest in making sure that we engage Kendra's law more aggressively than what we do. What does that mean? Because Kendra's law, when it gets applied, those who get assisted outpatient treatment, which today we pay for $1.3 million in a $245 million budget, I would increase that budget to make certain that we can assist those who are mentally ill. That's number one. Number two, safe beds. We have reduced the number of safe beds by 650 to 700. I would invest in safe beds to make sure that Rikers Island is not the best mental health care institution. Number three, I would make sure that the assertive treatment teams that go out and monitor the day-to-day wellness of the mentally ill, that we involve them. Number four, I'd make sure that we had the mental health care professionals in our schools. And also part of my overall policing plan would be to have an Emergency Social Services Bureau, a core of mental health care professionals that's set within the NYPD, also set within the subways to address those mentally ill.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Mr. Stringer.
You know, 40% of 911 calls are not for crimes or crimes in progress. They're actually, many of them, for mental health issues on the streets of the city or wellness issues. And I think we have to start thinking about how we build a mental health infrastructure to respond to what is actually happening on the streets with homeless people with mental illness and others. And that's something that is being replicated around the country. There's an incredible program called Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon. 24,000 calls to their 911 for mental health issues. They got a mental health response from professionals. We should do that program in New York and ramp that up.
Mr. Stringer, the city has begun a pilot program on that, and the mayor
I said
Yes.
we should ramp it up.
Yes.
So I agree with you. I didn't say that we don't have it. But the reason I tell you this is because part of what we have to begin to do is think about how we have less reliance on a police response and more of a reliance on a mental health response. And that is one of the things I would do as mayor. I would absolutely continue the focus of affordable housing because we need supportive services. When we get mental health issues resolved, we have to make sure people have safe beds and safe spaces.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. Ms. Garcia, how would you restructure the city's mental health system?
We are facing a crisis of mental health on our subways with people who are homeless. That has also ended up causing some of the crime that we are seeing there. We can turn this around by focusing on ensuring that they have housing with mental health services, that we embed a mental health professional with police officers like we did with Project Hope back in the 90s, that we have the psychiatric beds available to people who are identified by mental health professionals, and that we are using supported housing as our model, so that you have the mental health services and the housing to get back on your feet, to get a job, to reconnect with your family. I'm about solving the real problem, not bandaging the symptoms, because when we do that, we're going to have a healthier, safer, more livable city.
Ms. Garcia, do you agree with city officials who insist that building supportive housing usually takes a minimum of 3 years?
We can do it faster by doing conversions. We know that that's possible, and that will be much faster. I mean, the procurement process for building things in the city of New York is fundamentally broken.
Thank you.
And when I'm mayor, I'm going to fix it.
Thank you. Mr. Adams, how would you restructure?
Yes, and I wanted to pick up on the tail end of that, why it takes 3 years. It takes 3 years because the city is dysfunctional. You try to come out and get an inspection, try to get a sprinkler system, try to get anything done in the city, too expensive, too bureaucratic, and too difficult. But specifically dealing with mental health, what are the feeders of it? Our city must become a trauma identifier. And we need to look at what feeds mental health, like foster care. Why are we having our babies age out at 21 without giving them the services they need? Let's let them age out at 26 or permanent housing. In our schools, mental health professionals, so we can identify some of the problems that our children are having at home that actually compounds the mental health. And Ray is right, the Kendra's Law. Too many of our judges are unwilling to implement the Kendra's Law. And Eisner is right. How come we're downsizing all of these psychiatric beds where people are rather living on the streets instead of living in supportive housing? And lastly, we need supportive housing, retrofit our hotels, and we can make it happen.
Thank you, Mr.
I just
Adams.
want to jump in here for one moment with foster care, because I sat yesterday with foster care children, and we have to actually find them a family. Aging out means that we are often ending up with kids who are going to get involved with the criminal justice system. A forever family where you are still searching for adopted family makes all the difference. And sitting with foster kids is how you find that out.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia.
Catherine's right, but there's a solution to this,
Mr. Donovan,
which is supportive housing that we created directly for folks.
Mr. Donovan, we reassure you we're going to get to you.
It's Mr. Yang's turn.
Just take some
Thank
of
you.
the seconds.
Mr. Yang.
I'm so glad we're talking about this. Half of the attacks on Asian New Yorkers have been by the mentally ill. Well, they're walking around, they're mentally ill, they see someone who's different, and then they lash out. So this is such a crucial issue to return a sense of safety to our city. I agree with Ray that we do need to be much more aggressive about Kendra's Law. Right now, the standard is this. Someone has to self-select and say, hey, I need help, get me services. A lot of people who need help don't have the capacity to raise their hand and say, I need help. So we have to get the people the help that they need, even if they don't know it yet. And we can do this. There's been a standard in the past where if someone is clearly mentally ill or in need of medical attention, we got them on meds, we got them that treatment. We need to rebuild the stock of psych beds so that there's some place to bring them and make sure that if they are in supportive housing, that they're being monitored so that they take their meds. Yes, mentally ill people have rights, but you know who else have rights? We do. The people and families of the city. We have the right to walk the street and not fear for our safety because a mentally ill person is going to lash out at us.
So what would you do when someone who is potentially violent doesn't come indoors?
Again, the standard
Are you
should be that if
advocating
someone's
for
clearly mentally ill
involuntary-
or a threat or unconscious or unresponsive, then we take them off of the streets and we bring them to a hospital or other facility where they get cleaned up, get treated, get medicated,
Ms.
and then we maintain that situation and until
Thank you,
they're
Mr.
clearly
Yang.
not a threat to anybody.
Ms. Morales, do you agree with that?
So, I think the way we're framing this entire conversation is fundamentally flawed. We need to start thinking about, we're talking about people who are in crisis and they definitely need support and they need services, but we should actually think about the broken mental health system. Everyone on this stage has someone in their lives who has a mental health problem, if not themselves. My daughter, who is a survivor, and I'm sharing this with her permission, who is a survivor and had mental health needs for years. I'm someone who's connected, who's a fierce advocate, who has networks, and we have struggled to get her the appropriate care. So we actually need to start much earlier. And that's part of why I've called for the creation of integrated community health clinics so that we can provide services in communities to people, provided by people who they trust, by people who look like them, who are linguistically and culturally appropriate and relevant, who make people feel safe so that they can access a continuum of care ranging from peer counseling to much more intensive treatment. We need to actually start at the beginning rather than reacting to the back end.
Mr. Donovan, go ahead.
We are seeing an epidemic of mental health playing out on our streets and our subways. And it begins with a solution to prevent that mental health crisis in the first place. My 15-minute neighborhood plan would put emergency mental health and mental health treatment into every community. We need to change the way we respond to mental illness on our streets with real professionals, not asking the police to be mental health experts. And we need to make sure that we're investing in solutions in our schools as well. My Education Recovery Corps, as well as 150 more social workers would do that. But we also need to make sure that as folks are leaving Rikers, where more than 50% of the people there are suffering from mental illness, that they're directed immediately to the housing and services they need. That's exactly what we did when I led housing in this city and in this country. That's why we were able to reduce homelessness dramatically in New York and across the country. It's gone up, it's doubled in the last 8 years. We need a mayor who's walked the walk on this, not just talk the talk. We can increase supportive housing and end the epidemic of mental health we're seeing on our streets.
Ms. Wiley, we've heard you talk a lot about trauma-informed care. Specifically, can you tell us how you would restructure the mental health system?
Well, first, by creating a real comprehensive one. This is why I've talked about trauma-informed care in schools, because so often there is trauma and mental health issues that are getting misunderstood and are being treated as disciplinary problems, which is why we have a school to prison pipeline. So I'm going to put cognitive behavioral and dialectical behavioral therapy in the schools, including making sure we have social workers and student support teams, so that when students are showing any evidence of a problem, they're getting the supports they need. But also in our universal care plan, where we're creating drop-off centers for childcare and elder care in communities, they're going to be co-located with other supports and services, community-based organizations, but also government services, so that it becomes a one-stop shop for all that we need. And it is healthcare. Mental health is healthcare. And as we're looking to expand on giving folks a health insurance card who do not have it, we are going to include those services in that plan.
Ms. Wiley, thank you. Candidates, I know you referenced climate change earlier, so we just got a few short answer questions to give voters a sense of where you might stand on climate change. Raise your hand. Organic materials such as food scraps are one of the biggest sources of waste in the city. Raise your hand if you think organic recycling should be mandated. All right, all but Mr. Yang.
I want a pilot. It's very difficult to compost citywide, but we should have pilots in certain neighborhoods, 100%. Love composting.
All right. Large buildings are the greatest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the city. Raise your hand if you think building owners should be forced to retrofit to cut down on those emissions.
Can we finance it?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
qualified.
there need to be qualified.
Without a job plan.
Yeah, if we finance it, yeah, for sure. If you don't finance it, it's tough.
Without a job plan.
All right, so no one raised their hand at the question as it was written. You were saying there needs to be a public-private partnership.
It has to be. Or like local law 97.
Agree on that, apparently? All right, thank you.
Local law 97 requires it. We need PACE. We need other investments to partner with building owners to make this real.
You actually need somebody who's actually managed a budget before to be able to do this in a public-private way.
Mr. McGuire, thank you. Raise your hand if you think the city should ban the use of natural gas for cooking and heating in new construction and major renovations. Moving forward.
Natural.
I'll read it again. If you think the city should ban the use of natural gas for cooking and heating in new construction and major renovations.
Are you asking immediately or sometime in the future? We can get there,
I
but
was
it's going to
say,
take some
there's
time.
a transition
You
process.
can't get there
that always
immediately. You need
has
to have a
be in place.
transition process in place.
We
and you need to
do
be able
have
to
to
afford
get
it
to
in place.
net
So
zero,
the answer is
and we
likely
do
to
have
be.
to-
What? All right, well,
So
hold on.
that's a yes. Is that
So,
a
yeah.
yes?
Yeah.
Well, we should
Yes.
get there, and we
Yes.
agree
Yes.
that we
Yes.
should get there, and there's a
The
way
answer
to
is
get
yes,
there.
with a bracket.
All right, thank you.
That's a pretty
Alan?
good consensus, actually.
Now, affordable housing is a huge problem. Right now, the city is paying to build housing for individuals earning as much as $137,000 a year, and for a family of four, nearly $200,000. Where will you draw the line on how to spend taxpayer dollars? You have 1 minute answer. Ms. Wiley, we're going to start with you.
Well, let's start by saying that we have to confront not just the bureaucracy, but we have to be willing to confront developers, because it simply shouldn't be the case that anybody enriches themselves when they're already very wealthy, because so many New Yorkers, 45%, are spending more than a third of their income on housing. That means some people in the city are deciding whether to eat or pay rent. So we have to end the state subsidies. We have to actually make a plan, as is mine, not just to use all the powers of government to make sure we're creating affordable housing people can actually afford, which is why I'm doubling the size of our capital construction plan to do that, and to put people to work while we do, putting more money in their pockets to pay the rent in communities that need the jobs. But look, we're not going to just build our way out of this problem, which is why I have a plan to subsidize the rent for families of three earning $54,000 or less, so that
Thank
they
you,
don't
Ms.
spend
Wiley.
too much on the rent.
Mr. Donovan, what do you have to say?
Well, as someone who's worked for 30 years to fight for more affordable housing in this city and across the country, we need to begin by making sure we keep people in their homes, as we talked about earlier. But we also need to make sure that we're preserving the existing affordable housing that we have. You know, more people live in public housing in this city than live in Atlanta, Georgia, but we've never had a mayor who's actually invested in preserving that housing. I have a plan to invest $40 billion and make sure that we actually get repairs done there quickly. Finally, we need to be building more affordable housing all across this city. We need to make sure that that includes a pathway to homeownership as well. I started my career working with the East Brooklyn congregations rebuilding Brownsville and East New York. And that pathway to homeownership is what closes the racial wealth gap in our city. It will make sure that children can go to college, that families can start a business. That's the way that we change the future for so many families in our city.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Ms. Morales, where will you draw the line on affordable housing with taxpayers' money?
Sure. So, I think the problem with the way New York City has done housing to date is that we have prioritized, the process has been led by and prioritized by luxury housing developers. And so all of the tax incentives and subsidies that we make available are given to them, and we get a fraction of the ROI in what is really not truly affordable at all. So my plan calls for redirecting those investments in partnering with nonprofit community affordable housing developers, so that we are in fact truly creating affordable housing, prioritizing our homeless and our housing insecure. That includes the idea of creating social housing. It includes the idea of using city land to create community land trusts. It includes the idea of truly partnering with communities in the design of what these housing developments would look like, as well as increasing cooperative housing opportunities so that people could actually have a pathway
Thank you,
to
Ms.
home
Morales.
ownership
Thank
in
you.
New York City.
Thank you. Mr. Yang, what do you have to say?
Thank you. The problem with affordable housing in New York City is that a lot of it's not really affordable for a lot of New Yorkers. They use the average median income in a neighborhood, which in New York City can be quite high. And so that's where Alan's getting these low numbers, where a lot of people watching this are like, wow, I don't make that much. So we have to do what's called deeply affordable housing, and we need a better measurement than number of units, because some units are more accessible than others. So we have to have a better conversation about it. I've proposed $4 billion in investing in building and preserving affordable housing, 30,000 units a year during my administration, which is not enough to solve the problem. So we have to do more. We have to look at converting these Class B office buildings that are not going to come back as offices. I'm all for bringing people back into the office. It's vital for New York City's recovery, but a lot of the weaker office buildings will not make it. We need to try and convert them into housing as quickly as possible. We should also loosen regulations around accessory dwelling units and single room occupancy, co-living. There are ways that we can develop new forms of housing that are going to be more accessible and inexpensive.
Thank you, Mr. Yang.
Alan, one second.
Yes.
Sally, you wanted to
Yes.
follow up.
Yeah.
Sally's covered some of this.
Just to follow up for Mr. Yang and then everyone else who's answering, I think what Alan's trying to get at specifically is, where do you draw the line? What is the income level at which you say the city will not subsidize affordable housing anymore? That person has to get it on the open market, no city subsidy. What is that income line for you?
The income line should be lower than the numbers that Alan's citing. That if someone's making $200,000, hopefully that we can get affordable housing options to a point where that doesn't require city subsidy.
Okay, so below 200.
Can you give us a better idea of what the number is? Your number?
Well, we have to see what the impact is. Like, I wouldn't want to throw out a number level, because I don't know how many families that would impact, and what the right approach would be. But I do think that these numbers that Alan's citing are out of whack. And they're out of whack because we failed in building affordable housing for years and decades, because everyone's for affordable housing until it's in their neighborhood, and then all of a sudden they don't like it. So that's what we have to do, is we have to amend a political process that makes it impossible to build the affordable housing stock we need.
All right, move on to
If
Mr.
I could
Abbott.
try to be specific about this, 75% of the lowest income folks in our city making below $20,000 a year pay more than half of their income toward rent. That's the crisis we're facing in this city.
Okay, Mr. Donovan. All right.
If we could get to universal Section 8, partnering with the
Mr.
Biden
Donovan, we can't give you a second
one out of four
chance.
families gets that help.
We can't give you a second chance.
We need to
Mr. Adams,
get to universal Section 8 and more affordable housing.
Thank you. Mr. Adams, let me just reset the numbers as Alan read them. Building housing for individuals earning as much as $137,000 a year, and for a family of four, nearly $200,000. Right now, correct me if I'm wrong, the city is paying to build housing for individuals such as that. So the question is, what's the number?
Yeah, where do you draw the line on saying no more city subsidy?
That's such an important question, because circumstances are different based on the family. Listen, when I worked as a dishwasher and as a clerk in the mailroom, I was behind in my rent all the time. And the United Way did a study 2 years ago that showed 40% of New Yorkers have a sufficiency deficit. So if you have a family of four in New York and you're making $100,000 a year, you're still struggling. And so the goal is to wrap our hands around what is our housing stock, and we fail to do that. We have a lot of apartments where the AMIs are high. I believe we can actually drop them down, and we can subsidize the difference between the 130% AMI and get the families at the lower level. And I also believe that we can ensure that we have a real analysis, a real-time system of determining how many housing units do we actually have. We don't even know how many housing units we have available in NYCHA right now. We have to move our city to a real-time city system.
Thank you, Mr. Adams.
Analyze that.
Thank you. Ms. Garcia.
I'll be really straightforward and clear, as I have been since the beginning of this campaign. I have said 30% of AMI, and that we would build 50,000 units. That equates for a family of three to about $30,000. That's where we should be using our city money. But we have to build more across the board. We have to make it easier for people to go into construction, because time is money in construction. And when we hold folks up, we are costing people future homes. We do have to make sure that we are investing in NYCHA. They are 400,000 people. And there are programs that were created by the Obama administration we could do right now. That would create the $40 billion to do renovations for new bathrooms, new showers, new kitchens, new elevators, heat and hot water. But we also do have to make sure that we are building in areas that have strong transit and that have strong schools. And I know that housing heals, because you can't do what you need to do if you don't have an education, and you can't do well in your job if you don't have.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia.
Now, public housing residents want public housing to stay public And right now, our delegation, and including Nydia Velasquez, who's endorsed me, but also Charles Schumer, who's our Senate
Ms. Wiley,
Majority Leader,
okay.
is trying to get us $40
All right, Ms.
billion
Wiley,
right now through the
we have to move on to
infrastructure
Mr.
bill to
Stringer.
keep
so
it
he
May
can
I
answer the
just,
Mr.
may I
question.
just follow up on that?
Your answer,
Because
please.
This is.
No, we need to move on to Mr.
so
Stringer, Ms. Garcia.
Can I
Mr.
just
Stringer.
tag on 10 seconds?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I'm only kidding.
Mr. Stringer.
In all seriousness, we can no longer have incrementalism when it comes to building affordable housing. We need a much more bold approach. You know, the last 8 years in the de Blasio administration, it was haggling with the city council. If you support this luxury development in East New York, we'll negotiate for 20 affordable housing units. Then we found out that those units were actually unaffordable to the people there. So we need a bold plan, and we need to shake and rock this boat. And what I want to do is give land back to the people. I want to make sure that the city-owned vacant property is given to community-based organizations to build the housing that we actually need. I believe that we can build 10,000 real low-income housing units per year in a realistic way with a real timeline. I do believe we need to build middle-income housing. I got my start as a housing activist for Mitchell-Lama tenants. But the crisis, and I know this because I did the data and the reporting, before the pandemic, we had 572,000 people in this city, one step away from homelessness. And we know that 60,000 people with children will sleep in a shelter tonight. If we continue to go down a path of negotiation
Thank you, Mr.
without a
Stringer.
revolution in housing, we're going to be in a real crisis
Thank you.
post-pandemic.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of listening to the answers, which are not answers. You asked a specific question, and the responses to that question reflects the inability to understand how the budget works and how numbers work. So given the history that I have, it won't be my first time managing a large budget. What we have built up to this point is people who make from $80,000 to $200,000 a year. My plan, which is go from homelessness to home ownership, starts at 51% of AMI and below. The example that I have is what we do at the Bronx Common, where rents go from $225 a month up to the most that you can pay is $1,999 a month. They have not ghettoized what takes place there. One entrance. Also, they have places for seniors, elders. My plan accommodates elders. It is $12 billion that we have capacity for in the capital budget to build 350,000 new units, 10% more than what we have today of deeply affordable housing, so that New Yorkers don't have to pay more than 30% of their income in rent. You can see it on rayformayor.com, where the numbers that you've asked for are specifically identified, and I've responded to your question, which reflects the ability to understand budgets and manage budgets.
McGuire, thank you.
My competitors have not.
Candidates, thank you. We have a quick lightning round, maybe to help voters get to know you a little better, different aspects. So I want to ask you, how many hours of sleep do you need? And we'll start with you, Mr. McGuire.
I get about 5, maybe. On a good day, probably 5.5.
All right, Mr. Stringer?
Pre-kids, a lot more than I get now. Now it's 5 a.m. and I go.
All right. Ms. Garcia, how many hours of sleep do you need?
I need 6 hours of sleep.
Mr. Adams?
I should do 8, but I do about 4.5 to 5.
Mr. Yang?
6.
Ms. Morales?
Need or get?
We had need, but
I could say 8.
I mean, I get about 6. I'd love 8.
Yeah, that's right, Diane.
That's a better.
Mr. Donovan?
If you'd asked that question before this campaign started, I would have said 7. I'm testing 6 right now.
Ms. Wiley?
Yeah, I want 8, get 6.
We've had an indoor smoking ban. We've had a trans fat ban and an attempted big soda ban. What would you ban to make New Yorkers healthier? Ms. Wiley, we'll begin with you.
Oh my God. Well, first of all, let me just say I would love to ban every sugary drink that was ever invented because my kids suck them down no matter what I do.
Right.
Wow, a Bloomberg policy.
Yeah, Mr. Donovan, any initiative as mayor that you would try to ban something to make New Yorkers healthier?
Well, look, I'm glad you recognize the progress we made under Mayor Bloomberg becoming the healthiest city in the world. We brought life expectancies up faster than any time.
Is there anything you would ban, Mr.
And we need
Donovan?
to build on that. So
is there anything you would
I would make sure that we're banning food deserts in the city and neighborhoods that don't have parks.
Ms. Morales?
So actually, similarly to Shaun, I was thinking that I would ban the ability to operate a deli or a bodega in a community without having a piece of fresh fruit or a vegetable.
Mr. Yang?
I think these are already illegal, but I'm going to ban those ATVs that are terrorizing our streets
yes.
right now, that they're just like, making so much noise. You feel like there's a disaster around the corner. We're going to get rid of those ATVs under my watch.
Mr. Adams.
I would ban not having schools having vertical farms in the school rooftop gardens, and I'm successful partnering with this administration in banning processed meat, a type 1 carcinogen, healthier lives for our babies.
Ms. Garcia, a ban to make New Yorkers healthier.
I would love to ban corn syrup. I'm not sure that's within the power of the mayor, but I have had the joy of getting to at least ban styrofoam in my roles in government.
Mr. Stringer?
I think we have to really revisit the school lunch program and really drill down on the kind of healthy food that every school district should have. And I would really look towards healthy lunches. I'm not sure that's banning or adding, but I do think we have to tackle healthy food in our schools.
Mr. McGuire.
I would, I would ban healthcare deserts, especially for women in primary care facilities in our boroughs.
Candidates, we want you to say in a few words what you think your worst moment on the campaign trail has been. And so we'll just go the opposite direction. Mr. McGuire?
What is my worst moment on the campaign trail? I actually have had great moments on the campaign trail.
No, you cannot identify your worst moment or a bad moment on the trail?
I can't identify. I'm talking to New Yorkers. So talking to New Yorkers every day is a great campaign experience. It informs me on how the world ought to work and make certain that New Yorkers'
All
best
right,
days
Mr. Thank you. Mr.
are ahead of
Stringer?
us as opposed to behind us.
Mr. Stringer?
I've had some bad moments, but I've also had a lot of great moments. And I'm very excited about the future of this city, and that's where I'm going to leave it.
Ms. Garcia?
Oh, I think it might have been the day, and I honestly don't remember when it was, when I did about 5 Zoom forums in a row and thought my eyes were going to fall out. But it's so great to be outside and meeting voters now.
Mr. Adams, what do you feel your worst moment on the trail has been?
2 parents. Speaking with Ms. Wheeler, whose son lives in NYCHA, has lead poison that's going to harm his life for the rest of his life, and sitting down with Justin's mom in Rockaway, 10-year-old that was taken from us prematurely. The prerequisite to prosperity is public safety, and those were very difficult moments as having a single one son. I can only imagine to see those 2 boys experience that.
Mr. Yang?
Consoling a parent who'd lost his son. I'm a dad. I have 2 boys, and I just imagine myself in his shoes. Comforting him it felt like a blessing, but it was a very tough experience.
Ms. Morales, your worst moment on the campaign trail?
I think one of the moments that was most wrenching for me actually was standing outside of Yankee Stadium when it was serving as a COVID vaccination site and talking to so many community members who thought they could just show up to get their vaccine and having to turn them away because there were bureaucratic processes or linguistic challenges or other issues that had precluded them from having the information or signing up for what they needed. And they were losing wages because they'd taken time off. They had children. It was pretty devastating.
Mr. Donovan?
Every day this week, I've been out with New Yorkers living on our streets or in shelter, and every one of those moments has been deeply hard. I spoke to somebody named Nunu today who has been waiting 18 months in our emergency shelters to even get a call to talk about housing. But I will say there's hope too. The other day on the subway, I met Willie Boyd, whose father had been a veteran who'd spiraled into homelessness and a mental health crisis.
Thank you, Mr.
Supportive
Donovan.
housing saved his life. We need 2,000 more units of supportive
Mr.
housing a
Donovan.
year, and we need to finally have an end to this homeless crisis. That
Thank
we're
you.
facing.
Ms. Wiley, your worst moment you feel on the campaign trail?
I launched my campaign on October 9th, and a friend of mine who was there, who I was privileged to get to work with on school integration issues, and stood up at my launch. And then on October 22nd, his nephew was gunned down, Shaheem McClain, at 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon in Bed-Stuy. And calling him after hearing from him that his sister had lost her son, going to the wake with the family. And that was the moment that as a campaign, when we thought the first policy we were going to put out was on housing.
Okay.
We decided the first policy we were going to come
Okay, Ms.
out
Wiley.
with was the prevention of gun violence.
Thank you, Ms. Wiley.
And that was the moment as well. That was the best moment.
Ms. Wiley, all right. Some of you have described sobering moments. We're going to ask you this, maybe perhaps a bit more uplifting. What celebrity would you want to perform at your inauguration? And so we'll go the opposite direction. Ms. Wiley.
Okay, y'all know the answer to this one because we just had the first indoor concert at Irving Plaza since the reopening
answer,
with
Ms.
the
Wiley?
Strokes.
Strokes. Mr. Donovan.
I would have to say Kamasi, Washington. Just weeks before the pandemic shut down our city, I was at the King's Theater on Flatbush Avenue. And
Okay.
this is the moment that we're facing right now, a
we're
moment of reopening and hope, but we need leadership 6 days
Okay,
from
Mr.
now.
Donovan, thank you.
The most important
the answer,
election
yeah.
of our lifetimes.
Ms.
We need
Morales.
to bring this city back.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Ms. Morales, what celebrity would perform at your inauguration?
The legendary, groundbreaking Rita Moreno, because I hope to follow in her footsteps as someone who is making history.
Mr. Yang?
I'm on the record already saying Dave Chappelle, but because we're here on the SNL stages, I'm also going to include Bowen Yang to see if his impression of me has improved.
Mr. Adams.
Robert, an unemployed homeless man that plays on West 4th Street all the time. I would love him to come to show the symbol of the possibilities out there.
Ms. Garcia.
So I'm just going to be a little old school. I'd love to get you two if they would come to celebrate because I want to break that glass ceiling and, you know, feel like it is back to the 80s again and that we are changing the times from when I was a teenager.
Mr. Stringer?
I'm going to bring the greatest inauguration for kid performers all over the city in every 5 borough and dedicate our administration to the children.
Mr. McGuire.
I'm going big, all-star lineup. Mary J, LL, J, Nas, Diddy, Run DMC, and I'm going to have Biggie in the background. And if you don't know, now you know.
Candidates, thank you. That's all the time we have tonight, and we certainly thank you for participating in a spirited and informative debate tonight. We also thank the New York City Campaign Finance Board. We urge you to check the website, nycvotes.org. There you will find information on the candidates in all of the races, and importantly, you'll learn more about ranked choice voting, which is how the nominees for mayor will be selected. From WNBC, Telemundo 47, Politico, the New York Urban League, and the Citizens Budget Commission, we thank you for watching. Get out and vote next week. Election Day is Tuesday, June 22nd. Have a good night.